would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? All your philosophical and religious views, all your logic, because I say check it at the door advisedly because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them.
Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, an exploration of all things philosophical, alchemical, and esoteric, from the psycho-spiritual to the material-chemical nature of the all. Join me and my guests as we inquire into the liminality of mind and matter, and tend to the fertile soils of awareness and perception while facilitating an expanded consciousness from the individual to the collective. If you enjoy the show and find it of value, consider supporting and becoming a patron via the Patreon at patreon.com/philosophicalminds. A small contribution makes a big difference and definitely makes it easier for me to continue the show, although I will always do my best to keep it flowing regardless. Thank you all, and let's get into it. All right, this episode is going to be in regards to the music of the spheres and the relationship between the elements and the etheric formative forces. I am experimenting with a little bit of a different format today. I hope that this works well, and I'm going to kind of start off by speaking a little bit more than I usually do, and then open it up to my guest. My opening words are my attempts to summarize some of my current understandings and conceptions, and they're always subject to change. And since I'm still early in my stages of these understandings around these subjects, I brought someone on who has been at this stuff for decades now to help kind of facilitate and expand the scope of my knowledge and awareness. So I'll preface this subject with first by saying that all is mind. The all is mental. This is the first Hermetic principle. Good, the bad, the everything in between. All is mind. Second, I want to draw attention to the suggestion that consciousness is form and variation. Form or shape is intrinsically linked to the nature of consciousness and energetic expression, whether that be a thought form or a tangible solid form. We can look to things like the universal principles of vibration and rhythm, as all is vibration and all is rhythm. See the Kybalion for further elaboration on that. But basically, a conceivable way of putting this is that sacred geometry is somewhat of an infrastructural language of the elemental, ethereal aspects of the divine creative force that gives birth to all existence. I think of geometric forms as the scaffolding fields that house energy and information in the mind of God. To expand deeper, I like to look to the sacred Hindu symbol of the Om. The Om, from my understanding, depicts and represents the primeval sound of creation, the prime source sound of the all at its core. And out from that, or within that, arises an infinite variety of vibratory patterns that crystallize at various rates and give rise to the unseen, to the dense and tangible, physical material substances, all dancing and mixing and evolving and eventually leading up to our current experiential states. Biblically speaking, this is correlative with the notion that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God and was God. Through him, all things were made. And in my mind, I think you could say in the beginning was the Om, and through the Om, all things were made. With this in mind, I think it's interesting to consider that the kingdom of God is found within. It's a lot more complex, but you could say all sacred geometries emerged out of this one thing, raying or emanating out into this cosmic egg with its prima materia and alchemically incubating and creating life. Then next, we can look to the Taoist yin and yang symbol. I think it complements this idea nicely and illustrates the unity of opposites, as polarity itself is another universal principle found within all things, seemingly separate, but ultimately two sides of the same coin: the light and the dark, chaos and order, the masculine patterns and structure, and then the feminine matter or matrix. And the feminine receptive matrix is impressed by the masculine from the seed to the womb and what's birthed out of that. Another alchemical analogy is the celestial salt and celestial niter. In physics, we have gravity and levity, and we have magnetism and electricity, and the electromagnetic spectrum. So now, with a little bit of a foundation laid, to touch real quick on the ethers, I'll start with touching on sound because I think that it's comprehensive. And then later, me and my guests will elaborate more in detail. But sound is like organic geometric force operating on the tonal ether, or operating as the perceptible manifestation via the formative force of the tonal ether, or the sound ether. So to give an idea of what ether is, or ethers, in this instance, we will be talking mostly about the four primary ethers and how they relate to the four elements, although in reality, there are actually 7 ethers. But for learning purposes, this is going to be focused more on the 4 ethers. So keep in mind, I myself am learning, and so if I give my input, I very well may say some things out of line. I'm sure that I will. Regardless, I'm hoping to get more people discussing these things, and I want to put out good information and these understandings as they are currently, as I'm learning things. So I invite criticism or challenging to my views and my discussions to further inform myself. So in preparation for this recording, I've consulted a little bit of Manly P. Hall, some Rudolf Steiner, some Gunther Foxsmith, Ernst Marty, some Gurdjieff, the living Tom Joseph Brown, who is another great teacher of mine, who really kind of blew my mind open about introducing me to the ethers, and then also introduced the concept of spiritual proprioceptivity. And then here today with me, I have someone who I would say is another one of my great living teachers at this point, as he has definitely pushed my awareness even further and deeper and continues to do so. With me is Dr. Douglas Gabriel. I think Douglas is one of the most in-depth English-speaking orators in regards to these esoteric subject matters, and he has quite an amazing background and experience in regards to all things spiritual and esoteric, so I'm honored to have him back to help me with these important topics. I could have done this episode on my own, but there was so much that I kept consulting and deferring to you about and your work in regards to all of this, so I felt like it would just make most sense to do it together. So thank you for joining me on this transmission today. Do you want to tell the listeners that may not be familiar with you a little bit about yourself and your work and where they can find you online and learn more about you before we begin?
Oh my, yes. Well, they can find us online at ourspirit.com. That's O-U-R spirit.com. And on that, you'll find the Temple of Wisdom section. You'll find a section on neo-anthroposophy, which of course is a new interpretation of Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy. And then we're on Gab. We're on Gab Gabriel _ Horn on Gab. We also have a YouTube channel, and that one is where we put out some of the talks that I do. But we also have an information news network called Aim for Truth, with a 4 in the middle instead of FOR. So that is aimfortruth.org. You can get all of our books, well, at least, let's see, about 7 or 8 of them, and probably 25 ebooks, all for free online by simply going to ourspirit.com, and there'll be a link there so that you can look up, I think, 7 or 9 of the books. And then the other books are all basically inside of those sites, particularly the site ourspirit.com. And today you can find this book for free. It's a book I wrote because it's called The Eternal Ethers, A Theory of Everything. And this book was written for Waldorf teachers because they're supposed to teach the etheric body of the child from age 1st grade through 8th grade. But most of them have no idea what the ethers are. As you know, when people say ethers, that usually means they're at the limit of their knowledge. And they'll say, well, it's in the ethers. what is an ether? They won't be able to explain that to you, but or that it's ethereal, or that it's invisible but still has a force, or you name it. Ether has been used as an excuse since the beginning of time for people who simply aren't willing to do the scientific work to find that it has physical manifestations. Your opening to this talk, beautiful. I made some great notes here on under what you were saying, because really that's what this book was about, trying to get people to understand what the four ethers are, and the fifth ether, which is the Akashic ether, but that starts to get complicated, and the way that it's connected to the past and the way it's connected to future science, because there's hardly a single theory out there right now that does not address the ethers in one fashion or another. I myself am a Waldorf teacher for a long time and a professor here in the Detroit area. I have a very sordid past. So when you say, tell people about myself, well, I think I have over 1,000 videos out there. Like I say, at least 25 to 50 ebooks, a dozen other books. They are also available on Amazon.com under my name or my wife's name, Douglas Gabriel. And I've been a Waldorf teacher and anthroposophist, lecturer internationally for a long, long time. But you're the best interviewer. So just the fact that the way that you ask questions, the way you summarize things is so delightful for me that I will never refuse you calling up and saying, let's have a talk, because I, first off, really respect your site and the fact that you have got to talk to some great people who I consider to be my teachers, really wonderful, incredible people. So you're doing a great job, Sky, and I'm always thrilled to jump in and have a chat about the ethers, because you're one of the few people who actually know what they are.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, and I would just like to say, to learn more about you and yourself in regards to the videos that you've been posting on your YouTube channel lately are absolutely fascinating and just so interesting with all of the events throughout your entire life. I would highly recommend people check those out. You could learn a lot. And then I would like to secondly just add again, reiterate that I have tons of archived books on different theories of the ether and the history of different people looking into and trying to describe them. And yours is definitely the most comprehensive. And I think that you did the same thing at one point, going through all of the previous people who were discussing the ethers and kind of just putting it all together in a super comprehensive way. So just putting that out there. And so I've kind of laid that initial foundation. And so I'm going to lay it on a little bit thicker, perhaps. I'm trying to kind of ramble a little bit more, and then I'll open this up to you. But there's something that I'm driving at beforehand to kind of get people's heads in the right space. So keeping the sound or the tonal ether in mind, I want to start this off in kind of a fun way and look at language and languages in general. Languages are various systems created to facilitate communication, a structured set of patterns, essentially, that we can form a common union with in the crafting and projecting of a geometry through the instrument of our vocal cords, projected or casted out into the ether, at least when we're talking about spoken language specifically, because there's, of course, the symbolic symbol sets that become attributed to the sounds that we make, all of the various alphabets and whatnot. But basically, we make various noises with our vocal cords, and as we are developing and learning what words mean and what sounds mean, we learn a command of a language. And as we gain a stronger command of any language, we gain more and more comprehension of the sounds and how to use them, and the ability to more effectively create a resonance and commune with others with more precision, I would say. We expand our communication, and we're able to more effectively manifest, I would add. And then we learn to spell these sound combinations. We learn to attach our intentions and consecrate them into a more dense form via writing or scribing the symbols that represent and go hand in hand with the sounds of our meanings and our motivations and our intentions and so on. So spelling is another layer, because as we are spelling or writing, we are carving pathways in consciousness. And there is a certain amount of mental energetic structuring taking place there, however mundane or minute it may seem. Our human bodies that our consciousness is bound to and fused with in this mesocosmic in-between realm are multifaceted sensory, material, spiritual systems that act as a multidimensional transmitter, receiver, interpreter, and memory bank of signal forms of vibration impacted by a spectrum of subtle to gross forces and impacting a spectrum of subtle to gross forces. We're essentially impactable impactors. And depending on our levels of development and the direction and utilization of our will, as well as environmental or cosmic forces present that may act either to complement or hinder us in our pursuits and our expressions. So I want to draw attention to the word abracadabra. Interestingly, the word abracadabra itself literally means I create what I speak. We are all individual reality composers, or at least we all have the consciousness and biological energetic capacity and anatomy capable of invoking our magic. But in order to do so effectively, we need to know what that is and how it works. We know the word abracadabra, or we've probably heard that word as it's always associated with magic. And those listening may have specific notions of what you believe magic is. Magic at the core, in this sense, is basically consciousness artfully projecting geometry into such density that it gets to the point of manifestation. There are different degrees of manifestation and various potencies of willpower to produce various potencies or manifestations. Our eternal flame, so to speak, what I would call the spark of divinity within us, that is the mercury to our sulfur, or the spirit to our soul, that I think could be linked with what's referred to as our internal compass. That then interacts with our soul and acts as the driver of one's volition, from intention to the building of thought forms, mental models, and visualizations, to then higher densities of sound forms through things like vocal or auditory projections, to then more dense and very earthly materializations, such as tangible constructions or creations. And so, from motivation to creation, from will to manifestation, this is really the spectrum of existence to a large extent, and the cartography of our existential operational field as we may come to know it. Okay, so there's that. So before we get into the etheric formative forces, I want to ask you, Doug, a question just to kind of open this up and then get your feedback on a couple of things that I said. Maybe you can lend better or more refined perspectives to some of these things. And also, of course, feel free to correct anything that you have heard that you might differ from or have differing perspectives. I welcome that. My first question is, I was wondering, when it comes to the idea of our internal compass and how it relates to the soul and the origin of the will, I would love to get your thoughts on that specifically. That was just something for me. I wondered if you kind of saw a relationship there, and then if there's any other things that you feel like you would modify or adjust in anything that I've said so far. Anything that comes to mind, I would invite you, or just feel free to elaborate, and then we can get into the elements and ethers.
First off, I agree with every single thing you just said. Everything. Matter of fact, I couldn't have said it better myself, to be quite frank with you. Well constructed and absolutely accurate. Now, your question, I'm not exactly sure where you're going with that, but I would state that in terms of each soul must now find its own North Star. We are no longer underneath the aegis of a teacher or a church or a temple. We must find our own direction. We must create a church of one. And I mean that even literally with your own mate, because no one has the same view of God. And the only thing that I would add to the things that you said were just to put more elaboration there to say, yes, that's absolutely true because of, or because we can see back into ancient history, this or that. And your distinctions are absolutely clear and right. Now, in terms of the question that you've asked, yes, we unfortunately are divorced from our spirit. And this is the problem, because materialism, or what I like to call dictator science or technocracy, has led us into believing that they have all the answers, when in fact they have none of the answers. And they are not putting together a whole picture. So unless you know that the human being is body, soul, and spirit, then you really can't even get a start on cosmology. You cannot understand the ethers or the harmony of the spheres if you do not see yourself as a threefold being who is interacting with other threefold beings in a hierarchy of 9, which has 3 sets of 3 in it, and a trinity above that. So everything is in triform, everything is threefold. And as it is, unfortunately, we have been divorced. Our soul has been divorced from the spirit. As a matter of fact, there was a Christian conference where they basically said that the only thing a human being is a body, partial soul, and a little tiny bit of spirit. And then they actually ruled out spirit altogether. So spirit is not even allowed to be addressed, because why? It's invisible. Well, so is warmth, so is light, so is sound, unless you make it visible. And so is gravity, or warmth, light, sound, and of course, life, the life ether. But we can look then at the forces that they create. The warmth creates static energy, doesn't it? And it becomes refined in one specific aspect of the spectrum of vibration, of frequency. Then it starts to take on basically different characteristics. So light starts to work with air and is propagated through air, but light is also propagated through a vacuum. And we've spoken before about the misconceptions about light. People, scientists particularly, have no idea what light is. You can't find a scientist that will tell you what light is. It's like air, it's like water, it's like electricity. These are all basically invisible. They become visible by certain circumstances, but they lead up to what is the architecture of our atoms, what we would call atoms. I'd call them monads. That's a valence factor. And what's a valence factor in exchange between one molecule and another? That's geometry. So you have really nailed it with your opening remarks here, because that is so often forgotten, that the sound ether is also the number ether, and that it is, in fact, also electromagnetic frequency. And so when we look at man-made things, we forget where they come from. They come out of what we would call the unseen world, even though that can now be described in some fashions. And the ultimate place that it comes from is exactly what you said. It comes from the creative word. It comes in ancient India, they called that being Vak, voice, speech, word. And that word created Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu and their consorts, and it created everything. So when it comes down to it, the spoken word, the reason it's so critical is because even in the unseen world, there is a language. We call it the creative word, or the logos, or the archetype of the sun. Call it what you wish. But the point is, words have more power than most people ever want to give them credit for. With a word, you can create or you can destroy. Now with sound, as Paracelsus, as Pythagoras pointed out, every building built properly is demonstrating that there are forces involved. That force defines function, and function is defined by form. So when we look at the form of the human being, or the form of, say, great architectural structures like Gothic cathedrals, what we're looking at is the exteriorization of the human body. The Gothic arch is found in the femur bone of the human being. And that's why we have such strength, as a matter of fact, unnatural strength, almost supernatural strength in our femur bone that holds up our body. But it then connects with the previous architectural form, the Roman arch, which can be found in the human pelvic bone connecting to the femur and through the hip. So anything you're going to find in nature, there's going to be a form, if it's manifesting with life, there's going to be water, and there's going to be warmth, and there's going to be light. And these things are taken for granted. How things are taken for granted. If you ask a scientist what color is light, they'll give you some crazy answer. They'll tell you that light is actually 7 colors combined. Complete and absolute nonsense. That's what it becomes when it degrades. Where did it come from to begin with? And now all these great things Rudolf Steiner has pointed out, that light can go infinite speeds inside of a continuum. That is now found out. We've been able to accelerate, scientists have been able to accelerate light to be 10 times faster than light, 100 times faster than light inside of a contained spectrum or a continuum of a laser. So we're finding out that gravity is now a force exactly as Einstein had pointed out. But what is gravity? Gravity is the word. It's the creative word. It's the life ether. That's the third force that Rudolf Steiner referred to. And he said that once we understood the nature of frequency and vibration, that we would eventually get, he called it the first, second, and third force. The first force, static electricity energy. The second force, electromagnetic frequency energy. And the third force, he said, would be able to move the planets through vibration. In other words, gravity. And so what will happen? It's just like when I helped write Star Wars, they were supposed to put the power of the voice, like you find in the movie, or the movie in the book Dune, where you use the voice as a weapon and you build it up, and then it can strike out and it can kill, but it can also bring life. Rudolf Steiner points out, and that's the beauty of what you've presented here today already, Sky, is that the life force is considered to be entropy instead of ectropy. Yes, it is gravity oriented, but it is also the life force. And without that force of life, you will not have gravity. And without gravity, you could never have an atmosphere. So you could never have warmth, or you could not have light that's been filtered through our atmosphere. You would not have the harmony of the spheres, as you've made reference to, which is specifically the nourishment of the other planets coming to us as vibrational energy. And it's an electromagnetic force. It can be measured. It can be given a number at a specific frequency. But so many of these things are found as isolated pieces of information, and they are not connected. But what I did in the book was to go back to the ancient Hindus, the Puranas and the Vedas, and what do they say? They say there's 7 ethers, but there's 5 that we manifest now: warmth, light, sound, life, and akasha. But within our atmosphere, we don't get the higher forms of sound and life. If we did, we wouldn't need to eat food anymore. We could draw our energy, draw it directly from the sun through sound and life. And so imagine, what do we have down here? We have the echo of the planets, the harmony of the spheres, which literally control the functioning of your organs. It controls everything that is built into the correspondences of the planets with plants, with minerals, with your organs, with your consciousness, with your the constitutional aspects of your body. And then that's the part that we don't even get. If we got the full impact of that, we would be able to live outside of the atmosphere of the earth and directly draw from the sun actually, there are 7 ethers, but 2 of the ethers are down here on the earth, sound and life. But if you got outside of the atmosphere of the earth, the sound and life, so those 4 ethers plus the akasha, would give you all nourishment that you need. So these aren't dreams of people when they talk about Imedia, people who don't need to eat, or they talk about breatharians or light-arians, that all they need is air and light. Rudolf Steiner said that from the air alone, we draw all the elements we need as we decompose matter and we take out the carbon, the nitrogen, the oxygen, the hydrogen, and the sulfur, sometimes phosphorus, and we rebuild our own protein from the dying protein of what it is that we put in our body. But most of that comes simply by breathing and exposing yourself to sunlight.
Beautiful. I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned Star Wars, and I know that you had a part in that. People aren't familiar. Have you heard of the Mandela effect? It's
Yes.
Okay. So from your memory, because that's one of the Mandela effects is people recall, Luke, I am your father, but that wasn't the case. I think it says, no, I am your father, or something like that. Did that ever, for you, was that something you remembered or no?
The Mandela effect is so bizarre that when I look at some of these things, there is no way. I mean, I just have to look at it and say, no, there was never a dash in between the V and W on a VW. No, that's not possible. And then I look it up and go, well, come on now. I've had, 5 or 6 VWs, and where did they put the dash under the V? When did they do that? Or some of the titles of the books that they point out. Now, with that, yes, I would have sworn that was the way that the movie said, Luke, I am your father. Though when you go back and look, you see that it is not. But so the Mandela effect is, people will now say, well, that just demonstrates that we have alternate realities going on. Are there alternate realities? Are there different timelines? Yes, they're all in you. And so your perspective, and so whether the Mandela effect is true in the absolute physical sense, it doesn't really matter. Why did I remember it wrong? Why would I swear that Jiffy, not Jif, I ate it every day when I was young? There's no way. I look at this and go, no way. My wife and I were, we have a few years on these old chassis, and we look back at some of these things and just say, no, it just can't possibly be true. But again, it's about the collective conscience. Right now, the collective conscience, we can have collective superconscious, we can have collective subconscious, collective unconscious. And some of these things get put into our habits so much so that no matter what you think you remember, the habit of your body, the habit of your ears, the way that it was heard, the way it's been repeated, and so on and so forth, can actually completely redefine your perception of the world. And that's the big point. If you understand the ethers, if you understood the harmony of the spheres, if you understood that the human body is a 3D holographic image of the entire cosmos, then you can start to see how these things fit in. And you can see that your perception changes whether you're living in hell or heaven or somewhere in between, literally. And science knows this. That's the reason they'll now say light is a wave or light is a particle, depending upon who's observing it and when, because your observation changes the nature of light. That is correct. And it also underscores the importance of the human being in that equation. Human perception defines what these scientists think they're seeing. And because they have limited themselves to the 5 senses, and they don't have supersensible organs that can perceive or witness the unseen world with supersensible organs. And by the way, some of those supersensible organs we're already developing. Like we have a sense of warmth. Yeah, somebody would say, "Oh, they have warmth in them," and others, "Oh, they're cold as can be." That's one of them. The sense of ego. You probably met people that you wonder if they actually have a spirit, and you might wonder they have a soul. Well, guess what? They may not. And we've been given the ability to know that. You also have a sense of language. You can take garbled words and put them on a page next to a foreign language, and most of the time, people will be able to tell you which is a real language and which is just garble. And you've also seen the exercises where they take out the letters, turn them backwards, spell the words all wrong, and you can read the entire article, and there's hardly a word in it that is actually spelled properly or in any way normal, because we fill in the blanks. The problem is we're filling in those blanks with a bunch of nonsense because of what I would like to repeatedly call the dictatorship of science.
Absolutely, yes. And then there's a couple times you had mentioned Unseen Worlds. I think that was actually the name of one of the pamphlets that I had of the Manly P. Hall that I was kind of looking at in reference to preparing for some of this. And it was interesting, and there was some questions I wanted to ask you about. One, the cool terminology that he used, I think he said the Lords of Form. And I think he was using that in reference with the ethers. But I'll read out some quotes here. He says, all of the numerous complex forms which appear in this world are the products of the geometric outpourings of the Lords of Form, or the great bodybuilding divas. They are the expressions of the four rivers of life, originating from the creative hierarchy of the kings of Edom. I'm going to stop there and ask you, because I love this, and I get the bodybuilding divas part, and we can get into that in a little bit, but I have a few questions, and I wonder what you make of it when he says the kings of Edom, Edom. Do you have any insight into what's being conveyed there? And then also, if I recall correctly, in what I read, he related the rivers of life to the four-headed cherubim, and that was a little confusing to me. So yeah, I just wanted to ask you about those two things, and like what's the kings of Edom in reference to, and then if you have any insight into the cherubim connection to the four rivers.
Yes, of course. I knew Manly P. Hall, and I loved him. I think I may have read every single thing he ever wrote in English that's ever been printed. And I went and visited him, and some people I know studied with him, and he had just a absolutely encyclopedic philosophic mind. So he is such a perfect person for you to study. Now, he follows traditions. He wasn't clairvoyant at all, but he follows traditions, but he follows them absolutely accurately. And he had a library of books that is unequaled by anyone else in the world, actually. That library came up missing, by the way. It was in a safe. And the way he died is so unusual that you know that it was really dark forces that came and stole that library to make sure we wouldn't have it. Okay, Edom is a relationship to what is being talked about. That's Hebrew, and the Edom was where it was just above the Midians, and the Midians had a god named El, E-L. So when you say the Lords of Form, you're talking about the Elohim, or what are called the spirits of form, the beings just above the archai, the beings of time. So you go angel, archangel, archai, Elohim. The Elohim are also called Exousiai. They're also called El Eleh. They have many names, but the word El usually makes reference to God, and even Jehovah and Yahweh are considered to be at the level of El, E-L. That's the reason so many of the angels have E-L at the end of their name. Michael, Gabriel, Ariel, Zachariel. It means, for instance, Gabriel means messenger, and then El means God, messenger of God. Michael means countenance of God, and he's called the countenance of Christ. So when you're talking about Edom, you're actually talking about a group of Semites who Abraham kind of absorbed them, but Moses completely absorbed what they had and annihilated them and stole the temple, which was in Elith, again, El-Ith, E-L-I-T-H. And they moved it to Kadesh, Barnea, which was not far from there. And that was, again, really, it's an offering of the ethers in a sacrificial form. But the Elohim, when you're talking about the Lords of Form, above them are the Lords of Motion. Above them are the Lords of Wisdom. Above them are the Lords of Willpower. Above them are the Lords of the Cherubim, or the Lords of Harmony, and the Lords of Seraphim, or they're called the beings of. So Seraphim, Cherubim, thrones, and they have other names. I'll give you the other names: Kyrieutetes, Dynamis, Exousiai, Archai, Archangel, angels. Now, those 9 components are found in the human body. And there's nothing in the 9 hierarchy that is not ruled by the Trinity above them. And you can call it first logos, second logos, third logos, but the first logos controls the first rank of the hierarchy, the highest rank. The second logos controls the middle rank. The third logos controls the lowest rank. And again, all of those are in us, but they are higher beings. Every one of those is a higher being from us. And most of the time, they'll talk about them as forces. And so then they'll attribute them to mythological forces. But in essence, they are beings, and there is an entire evolution of those beings. But we have to remember that there's an element called heterochrony. So the angels right now in this particular round, what's called a round or a globe of the earth, this incarnation of the earth, the angels now, they're going to evolve. They're not going to be angels later, and we're going to evolve from humans to angels. So all of these things are on a scale. They come down, they go through entropy to the point of absolute dead entropy. And then at that point, there had to be a re-enlivening of that energy. And now we're on the upswing. And so we are at the 4th stage, the 4th incarnation of the earth. When I say incarnation of the earth, even scientists would agree with this if I explained it in the terms of warmth, light, sound, and life. And with sound, I'd call it valence. And with life, I'd call it gravity. And actually, the scientists would be able to go along with you and go, oh, yeah, that kind of makes sense, because you're laying down these levels that then become something in the next incarnation of the earth. So what was laid down as warmth ether in the first incarnation of the earth, that warmth is now minerals. And so this is something that takes a mind that can actually hold this in a stasis to consider the entire cosmology. And once you consider the entire cosmology from beginning to end, it makes perfectly good sense. In the short run, we're always working with limited information. So right now, scientists don't understand the force of gravity. If they did, we'd all be in trouble, because they turn it into a weapon instantaneously, and they attempt first off to destroy it to see if it actually exists. That's the first thing they do with anything. They can't understand warmth. They don't. Your friend, Gerald Pollack, first person to explain water to us, the first person in human history to explain water to us, because no one ever observed water before. He puts a plastic tube inside of water and puts these little balls that show the motion, and it starts to flow. That's how the flow of your blood in your body works. It isn't all these concocted, stupid things like it's a pump that works as a ram pump and blah, blah, blah. No, absolutely not. The capillaries of your blood at the ultimate end, at the ultimate extension of your body, to where one blood cell can go through that capillary. And when it does, and only one can fit, it's no longer being pulled out to the periphery. It's turning around and being pulled back. So it's not being pumped. These are the dynamics of water that Pollack has shown us. And Rudolf Steiner said all of that. He pointed all of that out. And in the experimentations that he had his students do, he put them on these tracks and said, no, look at the fact that water can flow uphill. And yes, water can flow uphill. Look at Schaumburger's work. Water put into a vacuum has basically infinite energy. And now we know anything in a vacuum is what? That is the basis of the Akashic scheme. The Akashic record, the Akashic chronicle is 0-point energy. So the scientists now have these theories, but they have no idea how to apply it, because they've ignored everything the ancients ever said. They tried to reinvent everything, put their names on it, and basically become a theocracy, technocracy that is based upon the religion of science. Science is supposed to, the word skio, science, means to know. Science can't tell you that you know anything. Nothing. They will tell you all your perceptions could be of a world that's a dream, and that you're a dream in a dream, or you're in the one of the 11 strings of the dimensions, or you're this or you're that. But what do they actually give you to hang on to? Nothing. And with the new telescope out there, which again, I always like to point out, it's not giving you any images. Every image you see from the Webb telescope is a lie.
Yes.
Those are constructed those are computer generated images based upon infrared. But infrared, you can't tell after looking through our atmosphere what's cold and hot beyond our atmosphere. People don't want to acknowledge that it's 5,000 degrees in upper layers of our atmosphere. It sometimes can get as hot as the surface of the sun. Well, how the heck did they ever get anything through those layers? We have no idea. You say this to scientists that there's such a temperature in our atmosphere, and they'll tell you you're lying. If you tell them that it goes in some cases from practically sub-zero to 5 to 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, no, why? Because they're limited in their silo of understanding, and no two scientists can talk to each other because they have their own jargon, they have their own secret language that nothing more than obfuscates instead of illuminates. And this is the problem.
I could not agree with you more. I agree with everything you just said. And in the beginning of that, when you were talking about you were touching on the 9 hierarchies, I think that it's such an important understanding. And I think that we actually had touched on that a little bit in one of our last conversations, but it actually is sinking in a little bit deeper now. It's like every time I kind of go over these things, it sinks in a little bit deeper. But I just think that these are kind of some of the core missing understandings in terms of, what I would say is a real science, or like a divine science, of the way that reality actually works. I wanted to read another quote here from Manly. The power from the unseen causal world works through the 4 material elements in order to express itself in bodies, cells, and molecular combinations. That's probably obvious, just given what we've already said. So we have the lords of form and the 4 formative forces that are the unseen causal pre-material forces that manifest into the 4 tangible elements of air, earth, water, and fire. So we're going to go through each element in ether, and something of importance to note beforehand is that the ethers evolve and they build upon each other in a specific order. So we got astral, warmth ether, then we got light ether, tonal, sound ether, and then the life ether. And these stages of evolution in order are what's referred to as, like Douglas said, ancient Saturn, ancient sun, and ancient moon. And then finally, the Earth stage, of which we're currently in the midst of. Is that an accurate statement, Doug?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I want to go through the ethers and give some context and illustrate correspondences and talk a little bit about planes, perhaps, as well. And this is something that I'm still kind of developing my understanding around the different theories as far as the, with the hierarchy of angels and how they relate to different heavens and what all that means. But anyway, so to start, we got the astral ether, or the warmth ether, related to motion and movement and the element of fire. Would it be safe to say it's operational on the astral plane, in your opinion? Or is that a...
sorry. Well, yes, but you're, Steiner will give you what looks to be different views because he's viewing it from a certain plane. So if we're talking about the Earth existence, and then we look at the warmth, light, sound, and life, it's going to be different than if we talked about the previous, which was moon, the previous, which was Saturn, and the previous, or sun, which previous was Saturn. But let me just go back. The 10 categories of Aristotle are the same thing as the hierarchies. We're the 10th hierarchy. But when you go to angels, you're talking about quantity, quality. So as you go up, this is the way it goes: quantity, quality, relationship, space, time, quantity, relationship, space, time, form, and suffering, and being. I'm not sure I got all 9 of them in there, but anyway, you see how those are things that science can look at. They can look at the difference between quantity and quality, but guess what? Science drops off at quality. They don't even understand relationship. So they can't go beyond the realm of an archangel in most of their thinking, let alone to a time being. And when you come to time, then you come to the 4th dimension. Time is, if you understand the past, the present, and the future, and you have a cosmology, you are no longer bound by space, and you're beginning to not be bound by time. So when we're talking about hierarchies, science would talk about forces. We're talking about beings. And when you talk about even the harmony of the spheres or the elements and who controls the elements, these are beings. These aren't just forces. They do have forces, as I mentioned before. They do actually create form. It's kind of like they're in the unseen world and they're casting a shadow into this world. And all we see is their shadow. We actually don't see them. And it'd be like we as 3-dimensional beings looking at a 2-dimensional manifestation. Well, we can manipulate that because we're in 3 dimensions. We are not bound by 2 dimensions, but in fact, we're built up by 2 dimensions. We're built up by 1 dimension. We're built up by the point. So the point, the line, and the plane, without that, we couldn't have geometric forms. And those are forces coming at us from all directions. And that is a key factor that is really not quite understood by most people who look at these things, that the cosmos is sending in etheric formative forces, but you would think that they would be coming in through your head, from your head down. No, they're coming from the ground up. Mm-hmm. So the forces of the stars, the forces we'd call magnetism, and the forces we'd call gravity are actually coming up into our body to the realm of the heart. And then the forces, the solar forces and the forces of the planets are coming down into our head and down to the heart. And where they meet, that's where your mind or your consciousness arises. Our consciousness and our mind is not in our head. It's a mirror. The brain is a mirror of all the different functions going on in the body. And it's objective and it's above it, but in fact, it isn't what controls us. So anytime we talk about these things, it's a matter of perspective. So what you're beginning to delineate here, yes, that is true. And then the only thing we have to decide is from what perspective are we looking at that? Because yes, when you enter into these ancient periods, you're talking about the physical body of the human being, the etheric body of the human being, the astral body, and the ego. And generally, in our time, you would say warmth is actually, it doesn't make sense, but technically, warmth is really connecting to your physical body. And light is connecting to your etheric body. And sound ether is connecting to your astral body. And life ether is connecting to your ego. And that's the reason that life ether it takes the creative word to manifest anything. So you may have the harmony of the spheres, but if you don't have the creative word that gives it definition, that gives it the alphabet, Rudolf Steiner pointed out that the true phonetic alphabet, like the letter ba, it is the same force that creates your rib cage around your organs. So when he does eurythmy, he goes ba, and it comes around like this and makes kind of a form like your own rib cage. So the consonants are creative cosmic forces. They are the etheric formative forces coming from the cosmos, and they literally give you your physical body. They create it. So the harmony of the spheres may give you the sound of Mars, which then creates your gallbladder. But at the same time, you would be able to know that that was the beings of the thrones, the being of willpower in the first hierarchy. And so all these things these correspondences are very, very complicated. And when you get into the etheric formative forces, you have to be so fluid because there's elemental beings, gnomes, sylphs, or gnomes, undine sylphs, and salamanders. And then there's warmth, light, sound, and life. Those are the ethers. But then there's also the elemental kingdoms that you just mentioned. The elemental kingdom of Saturn created warmth. But now in our time, it's the mineral realm. It doesn't seem logical, but you have to see it in its whole perspective. And so each of the elements is controlled also by elemental beings in the elemental kingdoms. But then there's also cosmic etheric forces, formative forces. And then there's the ethers themselves, because the ethers are quite independent themselves. They don't die, they don't go away, even though they can't be seen as well as we'd like. We can make them visible per se, like you can look at an electromagnetic frequency field by using the fact that it creates magnetic function, and then you put iron filings on it and it shows you that field, right? That's only a two-dimensional version of it. There's also a three-dimensional version. So when you're looking at Chladni plates and you strike the note A, it'll make a certain pattern, right? You have to imagine that in 3D, because that's what's happening. And so literally the notes of the planets create the morphic field and the function and the form of each of your organs. But they are some of them are gifts from the past, some of them are happening right now, and of course they're going through metamorphosis and they'll be changed in the future. That's also true for the ethers. The ethers change so that the sound ether and life ether becomes something quite different in the future than they are now, because we're limited in our perception. Even light, what we know as light, is any experiment with light that goes beyond our atmosphere is complete and absolute nonsense. Light is not moving at the frontal speed that they say. No, that's complete nonsense. Light is a continuum. So all the stars, it's not taking billions of years for their light to get here. It's complete and absolute nonsense. There is a continuum. And that's the reason that infrared works so well to give us pictures that we haven't been able to see before, because the infrared is continuously there, and they acknowledge that as a spectrum, as a continuum, that they're only looking at a component of it in relationship to where they break into the continuum and have a perception. So I know that was a complicated, long answer to your question of whether warmth ether is the astral body, but one could say, yes, but the warmth ether is also the other bodies too at a different time.
Yeah, no, there's a lot that you said there that informed me a lot. I think it's important to note that we do have to go beyond our standard linear thinking when we're trying to grasp a lot of these things, because in the grand scheme of it all, it is not at all a linear path or a linear set of events as we would typically understand events to go in a specific order. It's like a multi-dimensional, multiple things happening and interacting with each other at once and in different ways. So yeah, and then the thing that you said about the ethers themselves versus the etheric formative forces, I think that that's important too. And then when you were talking about the coming up from the ground versus we would think that they would be raying in directly to us, I was going to ask you, do you think, is that because the earth is like a higher order being, so it's like the first receiver of energy, then we're like the second, or we're like a lesser order being in that sense, so then it comes to us after that? Or how would you kind of describe that, if you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do understand. We stand right in the middle, and there are as many universes in our microbiome system in our stomach as there are galaxies in the cosmos. We are exactly in the middle. And that's the reason there's a vortex coming up from below and a vortex going down from above, and they meet in the heart. And where they meet, the human heart is created. That's why there's a contraction and expansion of the heart, because it's actually doing what even the ethers do. The warmth and light are directly opposed to the sound and life. And so they're constantly in a rhythmic exchange between each other. Same thing with the human body. So the human body stands as a member of the cosmos from the past. In the present, they stand in their heart, experiencing both the past and the future coming to us through our head from the warmth and light. And also that can be reversed and looked at it from a different way too, that that the past and the present could be looked at differently in relationship to that. But basically, we are given all these forces. For instance, every single cell of your body, according to dictatorial science, says that every cell in your body came from a star, a dying star. Okay? Who in science, or if you told somebody in biology that, they would laugh at you. So the astrophysics that we have can't even be comprehended by the other scientists, who you can hardly find two fields of science that will even cooperate, because they're so smug about what they think has their dictatorial powers over their own little silo. But in essence, the human being stands in the middle, and so the sun, and you've probably seen this, and now they're arguing with this. They've done computer generations of how the sun moves. But it is a fact, the way that it has been pointed out. The sun moves in front of us and pulls the planets behind them. And they know this because these magnetic cords that they've only discovered in the last few years through magnetic transfer flux points in the Earth, where instantaneously the rope, which has, by the way, 4 cords on the outside and 1 in the middle, those are the ethers, goes all the way to the sun, and the sun pulls us behind it in adjacent lemniscates. So we're following behind the sun, which is moving towards the star Vegas, and we are doing a lemniscate. And so the 3 inner planets are all doing this, and the 3 outer planets are all doing this in an adjacent lemniscate, and they're being pulled behind the sun. Now we know that the sun has got somewhat of a cometary tail. And so the sun isn't round. I mean, the atmosphere of our solar system isn't round at all. It looks exactly like DNA. Because now I said this when I was young and no one would believe it. Unfortunately, because of my curse that I was born with, sometimes I would feel the earth moving. And man, does that make you sick. It'll drop you to the ground and it'll take days to recover, and you'll vomit like crazy if you feel the earth moving. Well, I could feel the earth moving, and I could feel our solar system moving, and I could feel our galaxy moving. I could feel these different levels of movement, which, by the way, make you so sick you will want to die. I'm not kidding. Now, if there are people who can experience these things, and by the way, Theodore Land, but Rudolf Steiner pointed it out before. He was the first one to say that we are moving. Basically, science now says, I just saw it, and they think they can justify this, that a human being standing still on the earth is moving the speed of light. That is correct. But they don't know what the speed of light is, so it's kind of a moot point. But the point is that these motions going on are dynamic in the human body, and it's a miracle that we ever learned to stand up, to speak, and to think. And you were pointing that out in your opening. The ability, the power of the voice to actually manifest through clear thinking that is only arrived at because you could stand upright. A child between age birth and 3 does more miraculous learning than the human being for the rest of their life, no matter how old they live. Standing upright, speaking and thinking is all done by imitation, and it's done by perceiving the morphic fields of speech and thought, as well as your environment, interacting with your environment, standing upright. As soon as you stand upright, you become an antenna, and you actually become subject to the solar and the planetary forces and the stellar forces. But the one comes up through the whole planet to you, up through your feet. And the other one, well, we see that warmth and light comes from the sun. Without that, we wouldn't live. Of course, you can't find more than a few people on the earth that realize that or in any way appreciate that reality. So if you say there's a higher being who came to us from the sun to the earth to show us how to evolve through metamorphosis in the future, they will laugh at you. They'll say that's religion, that's mythology, that is total bunk. No, science doesn't say anything like that. Oh, science will say that, but they'll say it after the fact, after it becomes so obvious that they no longer can ignore it. But they will not pay any attention to people who have these experiences and have had them for 10,000 years, because we have, through oral tradition, 10,000 years of oral tradition describing these things in great detail that only recently the science is able to say, yes, Einstein was right, and good old Stephen Hawking was right. There's gravity waves. Well, they could have just read that out of the Vedas that were actually created 10,000 years ago. That's how far behind science is in all of these things. So this whole thing of the dynamic of the human body being an antenna that is completely hypersensitive to the music of the spheres, in other words, the vibrations of the planets that are in this elongated, it looks like a cometary tail is what it looks like when we move. And the spirit, the adjacent lemniscatal relationships looks exactly like a DNA strand. But it's, DNA is usually clumped up together, but this is nice and long and it's extending. And now they know this because they found the outer limit of our solar system, right? And what happened? Their satellites couldn't get through. Why? Because it's 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And so their machines, both of them, malfunctioned as they were going through that. What do they call it? There's a name for it. Of course, they've changed that name 10 times since they discovered it, because they don't want anybody knowing that the scientists never knew this, and they couldn't have even imagined it. And they have no clue what it is, by the way. They have no clue how out in empty space beyond the Oort realm, the Oort ring, there is a 10,000 degree envelope around the entire solar system as it's moving in our galaxy and in the super galaxy. And no, they can't comprehend any of this. So I just think it's very funny that literally every single day I read a new science report that verifies what the ancients said, what Rudolf Steiner said, what the tattvas revealed, because the tattvas are another name for the ethers, and that we put in this book, because all I did was take the wisdom that has been verified for thousands of years, add it to what Rudolf Steiner said, compare it to what the scientists are saying, and lo and behold, if you can find a scientist, I'm giving this challenge to your audience. If you can find a single scientist that will admit that everything that Einstein ever said was based upon the a priori assumption of the existence of the luminiferous ether, I'll give you a nickel, because you won't find any scientist that will admit this. Now, that's just one of the ethers, let alone the mysterious ether, the Akasha, or what we call the tree of life ethers, the higher sound and life ether. No, they're not even going to admit this. And yet they'll say everything's built upon Einstein, but Einstein has basically proven himself wrong in many areas. But one thing he did not get wrong was there has to be a medium for the propagation of light that is there as an a priori assumption. It doesn't get there because light travels and then illuminates. No, it's there or it's not there, or you wouldn't have ever seen it illuminated. So when we're talking about the ethers, you have to have such a fluid mind. And I really respect your studies here and what you're coming to, because you are absolutely hitting the nail on the head with what it is that you're coming up with in your earlier summaries that you gave. And unfortunately, I'm sorry, sometimes the answers are extremely complicated and long, but I do want to make sure that your audience, which I think is a very high level thinking audience, needs to have correct and accurate answers.
Definitely. Yeah, it's a lot of information. So it has to be explained in long-winded bursts to get the points across, for sure. So when you were talking about the letter B and the sound B and like how the sounds are related to different formations and whatnot, I'm wondering from all your research or anything, is there an alphabet or a language that you've come across that is the most accurate or true in terms of its ability to resonate and manifest, if you know what I mean? Like, if there's more accurate language systems than others that are more precise in their ability to be in alignment with their meanings and how their sounds create, if that makes sense.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yes, there is. Rudolf Steiner created a thing called eurythmy, the name eurythmy comes from the Greek dramas, where they would have dancers who would, by their arms moving up and down or taking certain forms, like this is B, this is A, this is A, this is E, this is N, N, this is M. So these things are in the human body, and he didn't come up with this just independently. At the same exact time, Peter Dunov was coming up with what he called paneurythmy. And we know those two were not in contact. So eurythmy was invented by Steiner, but paneurythmy then was taken up by this wonderful, wonderful teacher, Peter Dunov, Buenzo Duno. He's got a spiritual name too. And then also Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff said that he studied with the trans-Caucasian masters and the Sufis, and they knew this language. This language is a cosmic language. It could be called the original natural language, the language of the Atlanteans, they would call it, the language of the birds, or when you got the blood of the dragon on you, you could hear the language and understand the language of all the animals. So, the language before the Tower of Babel, whatever you want to call it. So there is an archetypal language. It does relate to the human body, and it relates to the creative forces in the human body. So when you're doing these gestures, whether it's for sound, for the letters, or whether it's for music, the music intervals have to do with the way you turn your arms inside and out with these two bones. And so there's the pitch, the rhythm, and the beat, which are all reflected in eurythmy, so that you can actually make sound visible and make language visible to show the creative forces behind it. So yes, now that's also gematria. So it would be Proto-Hebraic language, also had mathematical and geometric relationships to them. And so there is a primal language, yes, and it is a spiritual language. And you can study eurythmy, Steiner's eurythmy. You can study pan-eurythmy with the followers of Peter Dunov. Now, it's hard. Gurdjieff's form of this, he taught to his followers, and he got it from the Sufis north of the Caucasian Mountains. But there were other ones too. Throughout history, you had, with the ancient Indians, you had Kathak. And Kathak was a monosyllabic language that had to do with rhythms that were danced out with your feet, that only women, by the way, to begin with, hula and Kathak, all the sacred dances were done by females only. And those rhythms actually spell out the monosyllabic phrases. So when you go back and you talk about the Rig Veda or the Mahabharata or any of the Vedas or even the Upanishads, these are stories that are told still to this very day, and people dance them at the same time that they say them. So yes, in the ancient times, language, music, and the form of dance and the rhythm and the beat and the intervals were all spelled out, like in Hawaiian. I studied Hawaiian, I studied Kathak, I studied a lot of these different types of dance to see how this really worked out in the human body. And what it does is it puts you into a condition where you literally start to connect to the divine. So in Thailand, they have a form of dance that literally brings the divine into the room. If you watch it, you don't have to do anything, you don't have to know anything, but if you witness it, and you've probably seen this on the internet, that you can see these dancers who literally look as if they are deities that have come to manifest. Same thing with Hawaiian hula. It manifests creative native forces. So it is replicating nature. And it was considered so sacred that only the royalty could watch it. And if anybody else watched it, they would have to kill them. And it was, I can go into the whole way that it was transferred from the female to the male line. In all of these systems, it was always female, because why? They were intuitive. They were able to connect to this. Matter of fact, women invented speech. Women invented speech by singing and by dance. And so, yes, I always like to say that laughter, song, and dance can get you to the gates of heaven, but only morality can get you through. But yeah, that's the reason everyone really, when do they free their spirit? When they're dancing. When do they free their spirit? When they're writing beautiful lyrics for music or singing music. So all those things are very sacred and it's very real. And when they say that the angels are playing harps in heaven, well, it's pretty much that way. Sometimes they play trumpets, sometimes they play harp, sometimes they beat on drums. And if you've ever listened to Tibetan music, like real Tibetan Buddhist music, it sounds like hell. It sounds like hell has been loosed. They're blowing these long horns, beating on these drums, saying these things, getting carried away with devilish masks and doing these dances that will actually scare you to witness them. That's the way it really is, folks. When you enter into the spiritual world, you have to be ready to learn their language. And what does Apocalypse say? You have to learn the eternal gospel, sing the new song, put on the white robe, and join in the dance. And that is thinking, feeling, and willing, because thinking is, of course, images, feeling, which is higher imagination, moral imagination. The sound, of course, is inspiration, moral inspiration. And the willpower is, of course, it's dance per se. It's fitting into the rhythm. So when you say the harmony of the spheres, like I just did somebody's astrology chart, where the planets were when you were born, that's the frozen dance at that moment. You are that word, you are that note, you are that dance step at the moment that you were born, reflecting the cosmos. But then where the planets are now, that's another dance. And if they are opposed, that's disharmony. If they're in a trine, that's a harmonic, geometric, sounding, physical relationship. So as you look at these different aspects of the moving planets where they are now across the zodiac of the stars, and then you look at where the note that you sounded, the dance step that you came to bring, the words that you have come to put in the lyrics of your song and dance is literally related to exactly what's happening in the stars. And so the wandering stars, the planets, are in fact dancing. And if you can figure out their geometric relationships, it's astoundingly accurate what you can tell someone. I've been doing this for a long, long time, and many, many, many very rich, very intelligent people I have given extensive readings to, and they will all say that I'm at least 90, 95 to 100% accurate. How can that be? Not because I'm smart, because you just have to listen to what the planets are telling you. And I find it completely simple, but what scientist will tell you that the vibrations from Mars have anything to do with you, your body, your speech, or anything to do with your destiny? You won't find a scientist that's going to agree to that.
Dance is such a perfect word and metaphor to describe the relationship when you were just laying that all out there, because it is such a dance, because you have your individual note and then you have the cosmos, and I think the goal is to kind of dance with that difference and find a flow and a harmony within that, depending on your particular note and how your note fits in with the rest of the notes. So the way that you described that was awesome. And then you were talking about those different other forms, and like with the Hawaiian dance styles. I think I remember watching a video a while back of them doing some kind of preservations of some of these Hawaiian dances. I think it was on the island Molokai. I actually named one of my son's middle names Molokai. And that video was just like important to me because it seemed like they were really preserving a true lineage of something sacred there, but I wasn't really sure how to really connect with it or understand it. But the way that you're kind of laying it out there, it gives me a lot more insight into that. So thank you for that. That's awesome. Okay, so the astral, or the warmth ether, its a phenomenal state is heat. It's going to be associated with a Saturnian warmth. And that might be confusing. So yeah, it's evolving from Saturn's warmth in the body and expresses through the fire in the blood, emotions, passions, reactions, and then there's kind of like a Mars correlation, perhaps. So it's expressed through the organ of the heart, our auric field. Astral plane, it's said to be divided into two divisions. If I remember, there's the Kamaloka and then the lower Devachan. The Kamaloka was the lower division of the astral. So this is where it's even interesting, because it gets broken down even further, because it's like a planes within planes, or like planes nested within planes. So we've got the lower division of the astral, aka the land of sin, or the world of compensation, comprised of the coarsest planes of the astral. So it's these three divisions of sort of negative emotions. So to me, this is interesting, because of how it's like nested in there. And then it makes me think of like a really nice 3D geometric form, and then inside of it, discombobulated or not symmetrical forms that make up these inner coarse planes of the Kamaloka. That's just kind of how I visualize it in my mind. But so yeah, it's associated with Dante's Inferno or purgatory, holding things like hates or fears or excesses, a place of our demons, where the children of our vices are born and where we go to confront them. And then there's the upper astral, or the Devachan, and that's the home of the divas that we had mentioned earlier, the higher astral creations, of which I think there's 3 variations. So these are like the higher planes of the astral, and these are the more refined or sophisticated aspects. They function on the astral and the mental, but not the physical. So I'm thinking about this, and it's reminding me of an episode I did with this guy, Phoenix Aurelius, where he was kind of describing to me the geometry of the soul. So I'm going to have to go back and listen to that one again, because that kind of just made me think of that. But okay, so the higher planes of the Devachan kind of nested in the astral plane. We've got 1 formless, abstract mental essence, and then 2 embodied divas that are to do with actual mental formations or concrete mind stuff, and then 3 the fire divas that are actual inhabitants or the entities that assist in carrying out the aims of the planetary logos. And like you were saying earlier, the logos, so think of like the word of God, or the principle of divine reason and creative order, planetary divine order. So these entities are said to have limitless knowledge and to evolve. And this reminds me of what I've heard guys like Jordan Peterson talk about, like ideas. He says something like, people don't necessarily have ideas, but ideas have people. Or yeah, something like that. Like, talks about how people can be possessed by ideas, basically. But I just thought that kind of reminded me of that. So yeah, is there anything that you want to add in regards to the astral plane and those different layers of it?
Well, there's so much to say. The astral body is where everybody gets quite confused, especially at our time, because right now we are in what's called the consciousness soul era, but part of us can develop what's called the spiritual soul. And that's that distinction you're talking about there. And Jordan Peterson is correct if he said it the way you said it, which is really your thought's not your thought. If it's a thought that's lasts, if it's an eternal thought, if it's a thought full of wisdom, it's not your thought. You are becoming the vessel to hold it for a moment. Those thoughts live in the archetypal world, what Plato would call the archetypes, or Socrates. And so these are literally angelic. And so when you call them devas, this is the same thing as an angel. And angels are what? Angels are thought. And what is the entire cosmos? Frozen thought, period. That's all it is. And once you can break it down into that, then it can make sense. But if you don't, it gets very complicated. So the first place that we wake up is in our ego, when we say, okay, who am I? And then you're going to have to look at your astral body. And your astral body is going to say, well, technically, I'm nothing more than the sum of my desires and my habits and what my physical body is. And that's where people would kind of, draw the line. But the astral body is in fact invisible to most people. Now, you can look at somebody's face and tell if they're angry or they're sad or they're depressed or whatever. But in essence, if they wanted to, they could hide their entire astral body from you, all their desires, all their thoughts. They could hide them from you completely, except from a clairvoyant, of course. And yes, there's part of them that pull them down and part of them that take them up. And the ones that take them up into the next realm. And that's called in Buddhism, in Buddhism, it's called, it's got complicated names. The Hindu names would be Nirvana, Paranirvana, Mahaparanirvana, or Sambhogakaya, Dharmakaya, and Nirmanakaya. So there's these special names. Rudolf Steiner calls them spirit self, life spirit, spirit human. So there's 3 elements to your spirit. One of them can bring in moral pictures, moral imaginations. One of them can bring in moral inspiration, sound. And the other one will bring in moral intuition, which is usually a spoken word. When you have a true intuition, it often sounds as if someone is speaking to you. We call it our conscience or our self, or call it whatever God or deity you worship, as he called it there, the devas. I'm listening to my guardian angel. I'm trying to, and that's what I'm doing all the time. Well, if I can actually communicate with that guardian angel, I go up into a realm that is not physical. And my astral body can stretch into the realm of the eternal, because you can desire to have enlightenment. You can desire to have eternal thoughts. You can desire to have thoughts filled with wisdom, thoughts filled with virtues. When you're doing that, you're no longer just human. You're starting to develop that part of yourself that is going to become angelic, or what they call the manasic realm. So there's Manas, Buddhi, and Atman, same names, different names for the same 3 realms. So yes, manasic is when you're transforming your astral body into one that's purified. The Buddhists all pray for enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. They don't pray for enlightenment for themselves. That would completely negate the whole process. You pray for enlightenment and you desire enlightenment for the sake of liberating all other sentient beings from suffering. Once you have that impulse, then you're in fact working on a divine realm. And the being that is in that realm, those are angels. But unfortunately, there's another being that works in that realm, and that is Lucifer. He's the king of the angelic hosts that have fallen. So when you're looking at your astral body, what is that? That's your Luciferic pride and desires. And once you get over those and you're no longer just selfish, but you can be selfless, then you can start to have higher thinking. But it won't be for you. It'll be for the sake of all other sentient beings. And so the astral body, yes, right now, and this is a very, very complicated element of anthroposophy. To begin with, you have 3 soul functions: sentient soul, intellectual soul, and consciousness soul. And I was describing what's happening with the consciousness soul now. But that transformation going into the spiritual world already has to have other parts of your body somewhat tamed. For instance, when you're between the age of 21 and 28, you're developing your sentient soul, and it works with the astral body. It's kind of like saying, let's figure out what the sense perception, what the desire that comes from the world, the desire that comes from me, how does that integrate? And so when you're in those years, you're supposed to be working on that. When you're from 28 to 35, you're supposed to be working on your intellectual soul. In other words, doing the kind of thinking that you're doing, Sky, really questioning, trying to make a cosmology, figuring it out, seeing where you fit. This is all part of developing your ego. Most people think the ego comes at age 21. It comes to you at 21, but then you have to, for 21 years, develop it. And by the time you're about 28, you need to start to learn to be selfless. So in the intellectual soul, you need to be able to listen to other people's opinions, because they may have a thought full of wisdom that you don't have. And so you have to learn with the intellectual soul to not be egotistic, but it's the birth of your ego at the same time. So it's kind of a conundrum that you have to work through. It's a huge paradox. And then when you reach between age 28 and 35, you're in the consciousness soul era and developing your higher soul capacities, which literally, if you do, they're called spiritual soul, not just consciousness soul. The intellect creates consciousness. Sentience can create consciousness, but it may not. It may pull you down into the 7 deadly sins. So as your sentient soul between 21 and 28 starts to develop, you may just go full into drugs and sex and violence and whatever and never come out. Who knows? But if you do come out of that and you start to become reflective and you start to use your thinking in the proper way so that it becomes expansive and connected to the cosmic laws, the eternal laws of the cosmos, then you can really develop something special when you reach age 35 and you then start to develop your consciousness soul, which strangely enough, at that point, that is really dipping all the way back down into your physical body, because consciousness is born out of the physical body. That's the difference between Buddhists and Christians. Buddhists think that the physical body is Maya, it's illusion, ignore it. Or some people will say it's just your animal body, right? Well, that's not true. Your physical body has in it eternal cosmic laws, eternal cosmic correspondences. Your physical body has in it the seeds of immortality. Take, for instance, stem cells. Take, for instance, enzymes. They are basically immortal. You can't even cognize what an enzyme does, and you have hundreds of billions of them in you. And same thing with the microbes in your stomach. You can't cognize what your physical body is doing. So who's doing that? The highest hierarchy is creating your physical body for you. And so if you can come to consciousness and stop being egotistic and stop having astral desires that are just satisfying your 7 deadly sin desires, you can start to say, well, my body is the temple of the divine. I don't need to go to a church. I don't need a guru. I am my own North Star. I am my own church. I am my own religion of one. And at that moment, then your body will start to talk to you and tell you about the language that it holds to express the consonants. By the way, the consonants reflect the forces of the stars, the zodiacal influences of the stars, whereas the vowels in the language represent the planets and their movement, because they're always moving like a vowel, and the vowel is always action. It's kind of like a verb, whereas consonants are kind of like an adjective. But the point is that when you're interacting with these beings in your physical body, you are doing something very high. So you should not abnegate or ignore your physical body. Your physical body brings you the intuitions that are the highest element that you can attain, which is intuition arrives in your thinking as love. And if it's not love, and if it isn't connected to love, like mercy and grace and goodness and truth and beauty are all connected to love, because they all have to be harmonious. And then they all have to give of themselves selflessly. And then what's the highest hierarchy? The seraphim. What are they? Love. They are the beings of love. What's the whole cosmos? 100% love. And that's the reason that it all works together and doesn't explode, because it's not only harmonious, but it is selflessly giving itself to others at all times. For instance, your body, the carbon in your body always is selfless and will unite with anything to make something, to grow, to advance the nature of the being that is growing. What does water do? Water does the same thing. It takes on every single thing that is put in it. You run water through something and it will carry the characteristic of that, whether it be the minerals from the rocks and mountains it comes through, whether it be if you say the word love or grace or gratitude or thankfulness to water, and then you flash freeze it, you'll get a beautiful, beautiful crystal. If you say nasty words, bad words to the water, you'll get an ugly crystal. This is Emoto's work, the, what's it called? signature of water or something. No, it's not called that. But anyway, Emoto is the person who wrote a book from Steiner's indications on this. And he would do these exercises, flash freeze them, and then show you the crystals. And that just proves that when you speak, you change everything in your environment. And that speech is coming from your physical body, and we can procreate. And because we can be co-creators with God by procreation, or let's say this talk we're doing right now, it could live on the internet for a very long time. It could affect a lot of people. Matter of fact, people have told us that some of our broadcasts kept them from committing suicide because it gave them some hope. Well, that's the power of the word. And then the power of your feelings that are behind it, the wisdom and the light, basically the electricity that is exchanged, valence. If I'm having a thought and I can convey it to another person, even through this computer, you just change the atoms and the molecules in their body to a morphic resonance that is connected to that thought, which is, if it's a good thought, an immortal thought, then it's actually a being. So we cannot diminish the power and the beauty of the human body, whereas so many Eastern religions will say, no, forget it. Matter of fact, people don't know this, but Buddhists don't believe in reincarnation. You say that to people, and trust me, I've studied with the Dalai Lama, Gelug Rinpoche, I've studied in all the schools beyond your imagination. And they will tell you that the only people who reincarnate are the big muckamucks. The rest of us go out into an amorphous big Brahman, or the big Buddha in the sky, or the 10,000 Buddhas in the sky. Complete and absolute nonsense. At that time, when they taught this many thousands of years ago, humans didn't have a developed ego. And so therefore it was true. They didn't really quite have the ego to have personal, individualized human re-embodiments on the earth. And so what they were describing at that time was, that's why you have to look at any lineage that you study, put it in perspective with the time and what those people were actually feeling and believing at that time. But right now, all that's gone. It is an open field for spiritual metamorphosis. And going into Devachan, lower and higher Devachan, we're supposed to be doing that. Every time you have an intuition, you're in higher Devachan. You're in the realm of love. And so what you've described is absolutely accurate. And I just always like to reemphasize that you don't need to go anywhere. Your body is all you need to figure out all of this stuff. People who simply listen with a pure heart to their own nature can come to the same exact conclusions.
Absolutely. The book by Masaru Emoto, it's called The Hidden Messages in Water. That's so if people want to look that up. And then also there's a woman out there who's even taking it further. She's calling them hydroglyphs. And I think she actually was on a recent panel with Jared Pollock, actually. Her name is Veda Austin, if people want to look into that. She's doing some really cool stuff. But before we get into the light ether, is there any additional comments that you would like to add in regards to the warmth ether and how it relates to the element of fire?
Yes, there are two different things. First off, we are all slow burning fires. Every part of us, we're all on fire. It's just that it's a cold fire. We have cold fusion and cold fission in our stomach because we are changing one element to another, changing elements, destroying them and rebuilding them. And then we have cold fusion in our body because we are changing one element to another. This is a known fact, and yet it's completely ignored by scientists. So warmth is not the same as fire. Warmth is basically the medium that transfers you from one ether to another, from one element to another, from one kingdom to another. Everything, even when you go to sleep, the reason you go to sleep is because you tune into warmth. You become warmth. And what is warmth? It's chaotizing. And it's like light. It's levity. It's pure levity. It goes out in all directions, up and out in all directions, and down too, but in all directions. It rays out. So warmth and light are levity, sound and life are gravity. And warmth is the transitional element between the ethers, between the elements, and between everything, including consciousness. So as you're going to sleep, you can't really focus on those images that arise. If you do, you'll see infinite amount of images just streaming by that mean nothing. Because why? That's light that's chaotized. It isn't organized. When light is organized, it doesn't stream chaos, it streams wisdom. And that's what we call thought. So warmth is more important than most people would ever imagine. And of course, the warmth element, they would say, is attributed to fire, and fire is attributed to salamanders. And they don't know what a salamander is. A salamander is, that's just an example. It's not real. Why do all the others have, undying sylphs and gnomes? But when it comes down to salamanders, they'll say a salamander is in fire. Well, salamanders, of course, don't live in fire. What they're saying is that a salamander can, like a chameleon, change shapes and can withstand great heat because of the fact that they are a lizard, per se, or whatever they are. I'm not sure exactly their species, but the point is that that's just an image. The better thing would be to imagine the Pentecostal tongues of flame, or to imagine fire sprites, or to imagine the kind of sprites that happen on top of what they now show as lightning. They'll show the higher realms of lightning in the upper atmosphere, and they're incredibly more powerful than any lightning ever. And they call them sprites, right? Well, that's the kind of thing you'd have to envision to really understand warmth, because warmth pervades everything that's alive that we know of human life. And without that warmth, of course, we couldn't exist. We live in the thinnest little margin of temperature and atmosphere, and the atmosphere has to be exactly perfect, or we little humans wouldn't have any life whatsoever. So warmth may be the first element that happened on Saturn, and it wasn't really tangible. It would be about the level of less than a fragrance. And it would be physical. It wasn't physical either, like a fragrance generally is somewhat invisible. So warmth is, they think, the simplest of all the elements, but it is the most pervasive. And without that, none of the others could exist. Of course, it came out of Akasha. The first element gave birth to the other four. But warmth was the first that came forth. And warmth, of course, is any movement whatsoever. So when Vak, or when the word was spoken, it was the warmth of that speech that then later became, after 3 more incarnations of the earth, the very minerals that we walk on. And crystallized minerals were alive. So when the fiery warmth element was in the material plane, as the earth was recapitulating itself from the 3 previous incarnations so that we could live on it, the minerals were alive. They had to have warmth. They had to have chemical valence. They had to have an element of gravity. And essentially, the only way for them to crystallize is literally to have the amount of warmth that it takes to take amorphous liquid silica or any other substance and basically evaporate it into its perfect form. And that's one of the great secrets of warmth. And there's nothing that I could say that could probably emphasize enough how important warmth is.
Right. Well, the next one I think is the most difficult for myself, at least, is the light ether, or I've also heard it referred to as the mental ether. So that's interesting. But it has to do with memory, perception, reasoning, intellect, and then it's going to be the polarity elementally would be air. It's associated with the sun, ancient sun, and its phenomenal state would be gaseous. I'm going to quote Gunther Vaxsmith out of his book Etheric Formative Forces. He says, "In order to reach a more profound conception of the prerequisites of the existence of light and the world of substance, we shall first observe the reciprocal relationship of light and a primal element of substance, oxygen, and its variations, in order that we may pass on the reciprocal action between light and the manifold world of other substances and forces. And there's just so much depth that he goes into. I'll read one more little piece. He says, Goethe calls light a primal phenomenon because it belongs among the basic elements of the cosmic process, which cannot be traced by the human understanding further back to causes accessible to our experience. If we observe this entity light more closely, we shall discover that it certainly does not consist only of waves or vibrations, as this materialistic age would maintain. And then he goes on, but I just thought that those were a couple really interesting points. And it gets extremely complex, and he goes into pure light and how it's generated without warmth, and its flame is cold. And then there's something called the Smith-L flame, or something along those lines. And then he talks about heat light. So these are all concepts that are in his cosmic formative forces, or formative forces of cosmos, earth, and man. I always get that confused. But yeah, in regards to heat, light, and pure light, and just the light ether and how it relates to air and all of that, any insights that you would like to add?
Well, that is another topic I could go on forever about. But the point is that there are three types of light. There is cold light. Well, some light, of course, is reflected from the sun. And you'd normally think all light comes from the sun, but it doesn't. Look at the aurora borealis. That's cold light. Look at rainbows. Goethe said that light, the color is the suffering and deeds of light. And so the anthroposophers point out that the three types, lightning, the rainbow, and the aurora borealis, give you the three types of form of light. Light can interact and create color like a rainbow. It can actually rise up out of the earth as ionization, and because of the earth's magnetism and the solar wind meets it, then it can light up the aurora borealis, the aurora australis, and then of course lightning. And lightning is a phenomena that scientists are only beginning to understand that they don't know anything about. For instance, now that we are in a low geomagnetic strength period, we're having the changing of the magnetic north and south pole is an excursion, and it's going to meet somewhere in the Indian Ocean. That is demonstrating to us that, in fact, what is really happening with light has manifestations that the scientists can't even possibly perceive. For instance, they now know in just the last few years that every single cell in the body, especially DNA, communicates with blue light, light that is so dim blue that if you were to look at a candle from 10 miles away, it would be the same illumination. Well, this light controls every bioelectric function in the body. So whether we know it or not, we are frozen light, or light that is in our bodies in a stasis for a moment. But really, it's light that has fallen into a form and maintained that form out of their suffering and deed. So the color in everything in the human body is a color because why? It's a suffering and deed of light. And now there's a photobiomodulation where they can take infrared. Infrared goes all the way through the earth. So no matter what, if the sun is shining or not, you're still getting infrared from the sun. You're getting infrared from the stars. And it basically, that's what Gerald Pollack demonstrated, moves water, because the water is reacting to infrared light. While ultraviolet light can be used in biomodulation to slice and dice your DNA. They can change you overnight by simply taking light, sending in luciferase, identifying what part of your DNA they wish to cut out, and then they can cut it out with ultraviolet. Now, ultraviolet and gamma, well, they're supposed to kill us. Well, isn't it funny that they have such power over our DNA, and that, in fact, light is what creates all of our bioenergetic exchange? They'll tell you, of course, that it's adenosine triphosphate, or it's this or that in the cell, but now they have conclusively proved that it is blue light, very, very, very dim blue light below the spectrum of infrared. which we can't actually see with our eyes. So we are light beings, whether people want to acknowledge it or not. And in light that comes directly from the sun, it's filled with warmth, light, sound, and life. Unfortunately, the reason we don't understand light down here is because we try to use the same ideas that we use watching, observing the phenomena of light in this plane, in this atmosphere, a very controlled atmosphere, and then we try to project that onto what a sun is, what a galaxy is, what the lights in the sky are, what dark matter is. All of that is sheer speculation. That is sheer theory. We need to stick with what we know. If you flash blue and red lights at a certain frequency at a person, they'll go into trauma. They will go into, they can go into hypnotic state. They can be overstimulated into fear, anger, hatred, or ecstasy. So simply flashing lights at people at a certain frequency and a certain color can control the response of your brain. And so we need to understand that light, particularly as we watch it in movies and on the screen and on, you go to the theater, if you stand outside of a room of someone watching TV, you will see that the light is assaulting them. Just try this. Have a TV going in a room with no lights on, stand outside and look at the light. It is assaulting the person. It is ripping them to pieces. It is tearing them to pieces. It's causing adrenaline, cortisol, all kinds of reactions from your adrenal glands and from your kidneys to bombard your brain to say, stop, this is harming me. And so we don't understand that light is a consciousness. It's a being, and it can be manipulated for good or ill. And when you're talking about light ether again is levity. And without it, we'd have no growing plants. There's phototropism for plants. Well, guess what? We are phototropic too. We are absolutely controlled by the light. And the light that strips the melatonin from your pineal gland determines when puberty comes on. It determines the excretions of your master glands. So light itself is one of the most transformative elements that anyone can imagine, even if it is bound by the atmosphere that we're in. And so when they say love and light, I used to hate it. Oh, love and light, love and light, love and light. It's like, oh, just shut up. Yeah, I know it's love and light, okay, what are you talking about? A light bulb, probably. But if you understand the true nature of light, you can literally say, yeah, love and light, but also don't forget the warmth and don't forget the sound.
Yeah, that's funny. I used to have some friends that would fall asleep and slept with the TV on and an ex-wife. And for me, that's just very difficult. And I'm like, how do you guys do this? And with the sound on and everything, but not my thing. But kind of related to light, maybe in thinking about like the rainbow, Gurdjieff says some interesting things in his book. Beelzebub's tales to his grandson. It's absolutely phenomenal. I'm in chapter 30 right now, something. But with Kohler, for example, he talks about the deterioration of our organs of perception, and the organ of perception and distinguishing of the blending of gravity center vibrations which reach Earth from the eternal universe, the common integral vibration of all sources of actualizing, or what's referred to as the white ray, about the perceptions and impressions of separate blendings of gravity center vibrations, he says, that are distinguished by tonalities of color. And he was talking about how there was at once a vast, more larger array of colors that could be perceived. And the organ with the ability to perceive blendings of these gravity centered vibrations of the white ray, and just it was, I think, saying that we could distinguish a third of the quantities of the tonalities of color of all the tonalities obtained in the presence of the planets, or something along those lines. And if we were to evolve to perfect sight, it could expand like much more to millions of different intricate color perceptions or something along those lines. So that part was really fascinating to me. He uses a lot of really interesting language and to give your mind a lot to contemplate on in that book, but still not finished with it yet. So now if I go into your book, The Eternal Ethers, for more clarification, it helped me a lot in regards to understanding the light ether. You elaborate in depth about like the properties and the nature of light as well as air and the relationship, and it's so fascinating. You say light ether is invisible. We have learned to recognize other waves that are invisible, like ultraviolet, infrared, and electric waves, but these have the same characteristics as light waves, differing only in their links. Light ether produces triangular forms. It illuminates everything and makes all material things visible. It is also the force that makes plants grow upwards, like you were just saying, and makes people stand and walk upright, which I think you said as well. The triangular forms thing was kind of interesting to me. I was wondering, maybe you could touch on that a little bit.
That's where it gets really dicey. Now, the reason that it's dicey is because in the past, when they talked about the tattvas, if you go to Rama Prasad's book, Nature's Finer Forces, it will tell you how to manipulate these things in a way that can heal you, but if you do it wrong, it can harm you tremendously. So we have to be very careful with that. In terms of what light can do for you, essentially, it awakens you, because first off, let's just take what NASA has done. NASA has taken what's called photoluminescence. And what can they do with photoluminescence? Levitate anything. They do it with water, and they show that different frequencies of light, of sound, can actually create light and can also create anti-gravitational responses. And this has been known for a very long time. So when we're talking about light, we are talking about a force that is incredibly powerful. But when you want to go and you understand the shapes of the ethers, it gets very dicey. What you do is you can take a mirror, breathe on the mirror, and depending upon which of the tattvas, which of the ethers are predominant for 20 minutes, because they go through 5 cycles of 20 minutes. The second the sun rises, it's the warmth ether for 20 minutes. Then the next 20 minutes is light. Then the next 20 minutes is sound. The next 20 minutes is, it starts off with akasha, then warmth, light, sound, life. And so, and now they know this. There's these gigantic tubes that are rolling across the earth from the moment that the sun rises, where the light then stimulates these responses that are measured in the human body in 20-minute cycles. If you know the exact moment that you were ill, and you know exactly what ether was active, then you can countermand it by going to the opposite part of your body and slowing down the blood circulation there and healing yourself. So you can heal yourself very, very quickly with these things if you understand them. But when you breathe onto a mirror, it'll be a different shape depending on which ether it is that is active in that 20-minute period. So this is a science of the future that will literally be the great healing science of the future. And Rama Prasad attempted to help people understand it in his book, Nature's Finer Forces. But Rudolf Steiner and others pointed out that it's extraordinarily dangerous. I've only known a couple people who ever did this and looked at those forums, because otherwise, the only place you're going to find those forums is in Kirlian photography. They have done, Milner and Smart did a book called The Loom of Creation, and they did experimentation with your breath on a mirror, looking at the geometric shape that is predominant, and then basically mapping that out in relationship to the human's health. That's all well and good, but that's a science for the future. And so though I understand it, and though I have seen other people do it, I also saw one person go crazy doing it, and the other person just backed off of doing it because it gets pretty questionable. But it's very obvious. All you have to do is breathe on something and look at the predominant form that arises, which again shows that the warmth and the light in your body and the sound, the structure, the form, and the gravity, the life in your body can be determined by looking at the form that these substances make. There's a thing called sensitive crystallization, another one called chromatography, where we do, it's anthroposophic, and we do studies of the blood or of any substance that can be turned into a liquid. And we can tell you the life force and which of the ethers is active by seeing the forms that are made on the chromatography piece of paper or in the sensitive crystallization underneath the microscope. So these things are very real, but unfortunately, there was a mistake made in Gunter Wachsmuth's book. That's the reason that they don't print that book anymore. He made they weren't really mistakes. It could be seen both ways if you look at it, which shape goes with which ether. So I don't ever tell people a definitive statement except to state, like you did, quoting Gunter Wachsmuth or Ramar Prasad or what's his name, Ernst Mate, or any of these people who know these things. I know no one who is actually experimenting with them. And I think that's probably a good thing. But in the future, it will be as simple as that. When they come up and they say, you say you're sick, they'll say, okay, breathe on this. They'll breathe on it. They'll analyze the forms. You tell them exactly when it happened, how it happened. And if they can ascertain the exact moment you got it, they can get rid of it just as easy. So it's really a fantastically huge memory when you start talking about the shapes that the ethers make.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, Ernst, I think it was Ernst Marty, the one that wrote the 4 ethers. I was having a little bit of trouble going through that one because I just found some of it confusing. I thought that the Gunther Wachsmuth was one of the more comprehensive, at least from what I read. I still haven't read the whole thing, but it's obviously just a very wild subject that there's so much to. But I'm going to read a little bit more because this part, I like it. It kind of goes into the relationship with the element and ether. So I like that you kind of describe this. Light ether works through air. Air is not visible. It fills the space between objects and has no boundaries. It connects everything. It has no structure or direction and is like chaos because it has elasticity, causing centripetal tension and pressure towards a center. One thing you say is light ether helps create thinking. It is in strong contrast to matter. Now, on that note of thinking, I'm going to go to Manly P. Hall. Quote, thoughts are geometric outpourings of the mental body. They are germinated and visualized through the union of the mental plane with the physical brain body. Thought forms are created in this mental auric body, of which is considered the highest body of man, which has its material manifestation as the brain. We are surrounded by our own emanation bodies, which are constantly pouring into the reservoir streams of energy, both constructive and perverted. These streams of energy result from vitalizing our emotions and thoughts and thereby inferring upon them the power of our immortality. So I just really liked that. And I kind of I felt like it tied in with the light ether and the mental plane, but I don't know. How do you feel like it's useful to draw correlations between the planes and ethers, or do you feel like it gets a little confusing? What do you think?
It gets very confusing because you have to always decide which perspective you're standing on. Let's say Steiner will say, now let us consider the light ether in relationship to the angels. And you go, okay, well, I'm not an angel. How am I supposed to do that? When we're going to go back to the time of the incarnation of the earth called the sun incarnation, when light was manifested through the beings of wisdom. And in that wisdom, in that light, wisdom was woven. And he starts, you go, oh, that's all beautiful. That's wonderful. But when it comes down to it, I think we also, some of the planes and some of the tying it to the ethers or tying it to more material things can get people, it gives them a little satisfaction to have the correspondences under their belt so that they can say, oh yeah, light is wisdom, light is this, light is, And that helps a lot. But when it comes down to it, it's sometimes the very things that you yourself arrive at is the analogy, because you need an analogy, you need a metaphor for these things so that you can put them in place. For instance, if one were to say, through the light of the sun comes cosmic wisdom into your own thinking. People won't get that. But if they did get it, then they would really understand the nature of the being of light. Mm. So the planes always have to be considered in relationship to heterochrony. Which hierarchy you're talking about, at which time, and what is the consciousness of the human being at that time, and then you can put it in perspective. So I think it's very important to understand all that cosmology and the heavenly correspondences with the hierarchies and with the planes and with the planets and with all of that. It's very, very important. If you are a cosmologist, and you and I were obviously cosmologists, Steiner said there'd be two groups of anthroposophists at this time. Anything to do with the cosmology, they want the direct experience of Christ working in the etheric realm. And so they go to church, and through their beliefs, they basically raise up really beautiful moral desire for being selfless. So you don't have to have the cosmology, but guys like you and I know from just the talks we've had that you will never stop. You're going to keep working on this and making charts and making the connections and drawing these things together. And that's what most anthroposophists or cosmologists will do. But if you really want to get the full chart of all this manifesting, I have worked with people who had to have a giant dining room table with a huge piece of paper on it and writing in very small letters, all of this in forms that reflect it. It can be very helpful, but it can also somewhat overwhelm you because you get into, there's 7 incarnations, and then there's 7 of those, and there's 7 within those. So you're working at 7 times 7 times 7 different manifestations of life form and consciousness. And you can find your way through all of that, and it's all well and good. But sometimes just simplifying it is the thing that's going to actually help people visualize it. And so with light, there's so many things that science is discovering now that it's very hard to pull all of the current science, which Steiner says you must relate anthroposophy, his spiritual science, to what is being discovered in the outside world. And right now, we are in the most active time for that in human history, because as I say, every week they're throwing out their previous theories, throwing them out the window, and they really don't have one to replace it. But they do know that what they believed before is not correct. So what they think about light, they don't have any clue what true light is about, because as I said before, true light that doesn't fall into our atmosphere will give us life in its own nature, out of its own nature.
All right. I'll open this next one up with some more paraphrasing from Gurdjieff's Tales from Beelzebub, where he talks about a law which has largely failed to reach us 3-brained beings, where he references a small number of initiates or the adherents of legomanism, whom are striving to preserve the knowledge of this law through their productions. And he describes this law as the law of action of the vibration arising in the atmosphere of enclosed spaces. This kind of reminds me of Gurdjieff's quote, "Architecture is frozen music," which you basically were alluding to earlier with your comment about architecture. So the tonal or sound ether, or I've seen it referred to as a humidic ether or the chemical ether, associated with the element of water, foundation for all fluids, its phenomenal state would be fluid. Paraphrase a little bit more, and this is in your book, I believe, in a refinement of Günter Wachsmuth's work. Space is interpenetrated by waves produced by the forces of the chemical ether, which dissolve and unite substances through geometric, morphological, and harmonic resonance. Chemical ether has a tone and sound nature, of which sensible sound or tone heard by the physical ear is only an outward expression, that is an expression that has passed through air as a medium. Tone ether is the type of ether that separates and connects. Music is thus based on a force that separates and at the same time recombines what was separated in a harmonious way. Tone ether works through proportions, distances, and measures. It separates and recombines, creating a unified whole. All right, and then this may be another cool entrance point to tie in some more with the music of the spheres as well. But yeah, please just elaborate however you will into more insights into the tonal ether or the chemical ether or the sound ether.
Oh, yes. Well, basically, the planets are in a liquid substance. Gravity is, and even light acts like a liquid, and warmth acts like liquid to a certain degree. But generally, what does the fluid do? It goes to the lowest place. It goes down. It always goes down because it's gravity. And what's it doing? It's trying to bring, let's say, the rain down to the earth to stimulate life. And then it evaporates and goes right back up into the water cycle. And so that cycle is happening all the time in the human being. We are, of course, columns of liquid, and we are literally antennas that are sensitive antennas standing upright. And literally, the celestial influence is like a fluidic influence. And as I said before, every cell in our body comes from other stars, from other suns, and it flows into us. And so the constant flowing is always happening, but it's so seldom understood. Look at a comet. The comet comes out of the orange cloud, and it wasn't even material. Then it becomes material, goes towards the sun, defies everything we know about thermodynamics. It doesn't melt. It's a ball of ice. Its tail goes out from the sun, showing that that's the solar breath, which of course they didn't understand until they realized that. But why does this fluidic activity happen in the cosmos? Everything is fluid in the cosmos because everything is in valence. Everything is relating to everything else that's anywhere near it. And that is either harmonious or disharmonious. And so it's the sound. And when you can have sound without having life. And life is the thing that gives the final creative form to something. But if it's in a fluid form, of course, it isn't necessarily locked into a form. As a matter of fact, the only perfect form of any fluid is, of course, a single drop. And that drop is so powerful when it's in a fluid like water that enough drops can cut through a rock. So what is happening with the fluid? The fluid is listening to other elements, and they're able to draw themselves. For instance, an enzyme. The enzymes in our bodies can produce over 1 trillion reactions in 1 second. And they say it's a lock and key mechanism. No, it's not. That's completely stupid. I mean, that's the reason that dictatorial science just blocks you from having any clear thinking. It couldn't possibly contact 1 trillion other molecules and affect them as a catalyst without losing any substance itself. An enzyme never loses its substance. So what is it? It's a note. It's not a key in a hole. It's a note. And that resonance can contact 1 trillion other cells per second. That's morphic resonance. That's how basically all thought is collectively pulled together. And someone who's an idiot savant, who is an idiot savant for number or for music, and I've known a bunch of them in the anthroposophic communities I've lived in the East Coast, I've seen people who were spastic, literally shook so bad, they pick up a violin and they play it so perfectly without looking at music, all by ear. And this one particular individual I knew, he played with the New York Philharmonic, he played with the Boston Philharmonic. He doesn't even read music. He hears the piece, memorizes it, and can play it. Same thing with Suzuki methods, which we use in Waldorf education. We teach them the whole song from the beginning. If the one person has it memorized and they present this music, the other person can pick up the whole thing. How is that? Because sound creates a morphic resonance that is a form that is like a cloud. And inside of that cloud, it has astounding powers to create and destroy. And when we finally learn to use, because we have learned what is, even a laser acts like a fluid. Most gravity acts like a fluid, light acts like a fluid, warmth, all of these things have a fluidic nature to them. And when he's talking about that sensitive flame, that where in the air you speak into a flame, it will actually create these forms. Those are fluid forms. And what are the fluid forms? They create Julia sets. And what is a Julia set? It's a solar system. It's a galaxy. And what is it that the Julia sets nest? Mandelbrot sets. And what is a Mandelbrot set? It is a form. Right now, it's that you can make a three-dimensional aspect and manifestation of a Mandelbrot set, though it's very hard, and the science and math for that is very complicated. But if you just take a two-dimensional Mandelbrot set, it has 7 foci. Well, we have 7 major planets. And in our body, we have 7 major chakras. And so when they come into balance, musical resonance and harmony, and they create a symphony. And this symphony creates what I would call the monad. I believe that the atom is not the shape that they give it. It's a Mandelbrot set, and that it is motion of electrons around a neutron around the center. And so let's say the components of the atom can actually be found in the Mandelbrot set. And the Mandelbrot set is a harmonic manifestation of 7 different notes. And that's what we get with antimony. So antimony is supposed to be a substance that has all 7 of the metals from the 7 planets all working together as one. That's what Tibetan bells are made out of. That's what they make their bowls out of, their bells, their dorjes. All these different things are literally the combination of the harmony of the spheres. And so when you ring a Tibetan bowl, you're actually stimulating all 7 chakras. So when you're talking about sound, you can heal people with a tuning fork. You can heal telomeres with a specific sound vibration. And I forget the exact frequency, but this is well known, and NASA has also done experimentations with this. And they take a person, they simply hit them with a certain sound, and their telomeres round off and heal, the frayed telomeres. Well, that's what causes us to age. So sound has the secret of physical longevity in it. And when you're talking about somebody who lives a long time, it's because they're living in harmony with nature. Their art of living is, in fact, a symphony. So there's no end to what we could say about sound. And basically, again, what science would tell us about sound is really somewhat immature, because they don't get what Pythagoras said, that any building he could look at, realize what note it was built on, strike the opposite note, and the building collapses. Well, we know this happens. Earthquakes do that. Wilhelm Reich developed a little tiny device this big. He put it on the post of his house, and it's just a frequency, a certain beat frequency resonator. And what happened? An earthquake happened. So sound has the capacity to move planets. It has the capacity to keep all the planets in harmony. And if they go out of harmony one tiny bit, we would have a disaster. So it doesn't. When you're looking at the whole cosmos, even when you're looking at a supernova, you're looking at a black hole, you are looking at pure music. But it takes the creative word to round that off, to direct it to what the co-creator wishes to do. And that's what speech does. So you can take all the sounds, you can take all the music, and yes, music is the universal language. But when it comes down to it, it's the creative word that actually can manifest the power of what music or sound has to give us.
Wow, that was amazing. I had no idea that the Tibetan bowls were made with antimony either. And because alchemically, I've heard that antimony contains within it the 7 aspects of the planets, and so with the 7 notes, that's awesome. And that 7-foldness, I think Gurdjieff refers to it as a hepta hari pashina or something like that, I'm thinking. But Wow, that is so
It
interesting.
was called Newton's dream. When you get the proper Platonic solids all touching each other in a certain way that represent the planets, you have Kepler's dream. And this is the key factor. Now they cheat because you can get antimony and you can get cadmium and nickel and iron and all these other metals in a pretty clear mixture that never corrodes and that comes from meteorites. So in every single true Tibetan bowl, dorje, Vishnu Vajra, whatever, any of their spiritual weapons, like this one, this is a Vishnu Vajra, but it's in crystal. But any of these spiritual weapons have meteorite in them because it causes them not to corrode. It causes them to have incredible strength. And initially, in the Bronze Age, it was meteorite that was found because you had to refine iron to use it for the Iron Age. But they would take meteorite and they'd melt it down and put it into the bronze, and it would make it extremely hard. And you can actually identify exactly when a weapon head, a spearhead, or a sword or a knife was created if it has meteorite in it. We've done studies like this when we were vetting certain things that we were trying to figure out what they were in history and whether they were real. Trying to figure out if this real spearhead really goes back to a Magna Hasta of the 1st century, things like that. So yes, with sound, if you take meteorite and the meteorite has enough of the right metals in it, you create truly magical things. Matter of fact, the Indonesians believed that those meteorites were gods, and they created knives called krises, and they would go into trance as they were hammering them out, and they would use their lips to cool the metal and yet not burn their lips. So when you start talking about the magic of the metals in meteorites, or the combination of the metals, which are really the sounds of the planets, you create a substance that goes beyond anything. You can create a substance that goes beyond anything that's on Earth and actually is a transcendental physical element through sound that can become quite selfless in its nature. And that's the reason that they're used for creating music.
Wow. You said Visha Varsu. Is that what was the name of that?
This is a Vajra, and this is a Vishnu Vajra because it's a double Vajra. Okay. So it's the male and the female. And by the way, you see the 4 elements here and the one in the middle, that's the ethers. Mm-hmm. Each one of these represents the ethers. And when you use it as a spiritual weapon, these two spin different directions and they create what's called the diamond lightning bolt, or the Wangpo Dorje, or the Great Dorje, the lightning bolt, diamond hard Dorje. And that's what they're making reference to, or the combination of the 7 metals in the proper way, that they in fact become a lightning bolt of consciousness. And when you put the male, these are 2 males put together, but they're used as a spiritual weapon. And I have seen my teacher create one of those just right here where I could see him, and he projected it at a cloud and he didn't want his barbecued food to get rained on. And he split a cloud so that 2 feet over here, it's pouring down rain, 2 feet over here, it's pouring down rain. But as long as he kept that Vishnu Vajra spinning in the right direction and knowing what they represent, he was able to split a cloud and not be rained on. I've seen him do this repeatedly.
Okay, that's so interesting. And this, I actually wanted to ask you about this. I think I had written this in my notes for actually a while ago, but I forgot the name of it and I wasn't sure what it was called. I think it was Tom Brown who actually had introduced me to that symbol, but I don't know if he elaborated much on it. But I've seen these ones that are like these big ancient devices, but the ones I've seen are double-sided. They're not 4. It's just one single one, and they're pretty big, and they have like the ends of them have these particular, I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, I wanted to ask you about those big ones. Were these some kind of like ancient technological devices or something? Because I think that they have excavated some of these or gotten some of these in archaeological digs or something where they have these big ancient ones that look like what you're wearing, but it's only it's only one. It's not the cross. It's just like one that you could like hold with your hand or something like that. But yeah, do you have any insight into what those were?
I'm not exactly sure what you're making reference to. So they look like a dorje, but they were very large.
Yeah, it's just a double-sided one, but it's like a huge version, like say like this big, and like you could hold it
Yeah.
with your hand or something. But if you look them up online, which I couldn't remember the name to search them, but you can find these, and they're very expensive, and they're some kind of ancient relics or something, but I couldn't really find a lot of information. That's something that I wanted to ask you about, but I'll have to try to dig that up and then send it to you to see if it looks familiar to you or anything.
Now, are they round and look like an album?
The middle of them
Or
are cylindrical in the middle, but the ends of them are actually, they kind of, there's different shapes to them, but they're all kind of like the same thing. Yeah, I'll have to find some, and they're not all identical.
it sounds like
Yeah.
yeah, it sounds like a purba. And a purba is used to create sacred space. And they can be very large because sometimes they use them, outside of the temple and they stick them in the ground. But I'm not sure that that's what you're talking about. I think I'd have to probably see that. But in terms of sound, in the Tibetan plateau, they found all these things that look like albums. And in the album, and they go around just like in a record, and they have all these different grooves in them. And people have no idea what they are. And people will tell you they're from aliens. Those were actually that a psychic could look at those, a clairvoyant could look at those and hear them speak. So they were like an album of music, like a pressed vinyl album of music, but they didn't have to spin them. They just had to put their hand on them. And then because of the frequency that they could experience clairvoyantly, it would actually have a message. And those are some of the oldest form of texts that you can find. They don't use pictograms. They use actually frequency modulation by putting it into these grooves. But I'm not sure that's what you're talking about either. I'd be fascinated to see what it is you're making reference to.
Yeah, I'll find some and then I'll send them your way. You can tell me what you think. But okay, so a further elaboration on the sound ether plays a role in all processes where things are separated and then recombined in new harmonic proportions, characterized by the conceptions of separating, structuring, creating proportions, and harmonizing. The number ether is also another name for it, and this creates the numbers and numerical proportions of the created world. It brings order and harmony to the growth of all living things through the harmony of the spheres, as you're saying, the basis for all chemical activity between substances, sometimes causing it to be called the valence ether, like you said as well. Is there anything else before we wrap up with the sound ether that you would like to add additionally?
Just that I think that we barely scratched the surface with science with what sound can do. And I think that in the future, as I predicted also, light will be one of the great healing forces. Sound will be just as strong, if not stronger.
All right, so the physical or solid or atomic or life ether revolving around crystallization, fixity, and what structures phenomena, the foundation for all solids. Its elemental polarity would be associated with earth. So its form building tendency, when it can exert its effect unhindered in substance, leads to square shapes that are expressed, for instance, in crystallizing salt, which I've done this myself. I can attest to that. Life ether is the great healer. This allows physical processes that have gone wild to reintegrate themselves back into the life processes to create the balance of health again. This develops the quality of integrating and uniting. So take it away and go ahead and elaborate any further that you would like on the life ether.
Yes, well, life ether is one that's so little understood. It's called the third force when it becomes a manifestation in the physical world, which can move objects. Now, when we crystallize, we basically become an antenna for that particular frequency. So in each of your organs, in each of your ductless glands, there are in fact crystals. There's hexagonal crystals in your auricle of your ear. And that creates your balance. It creates your ability to hear, your ability to understand space, to figure out what you are in space. So when we're talking about life ether, we're talking about the most material of all substances. And yet it's so delicate that without warmth, light, and sound in perfect manifestation, you won't have life. And what is it that gives life? It's the forming of physical substance that literally draws to it the energy that it needs. For instance, piezoelectric crystals in your pineal gland cause piezoelectric charges through your brain, which then have fantastic manifestations. That would be true with the any crystalline structure in your body from enzymes from your ductless glands like estrogen, testosterone, melatonin. All these things are crystal structures. And the crystal structures are so important. Steiner calls the calcium carbonate crystal structures, which of course is life ether, because they are a specific, exact structure that is the same for every single piece of calcium carbonate crystal that goes through this process. It's the same in everyone's body, right? So the crystals in your head, the brain crystals in your head are the same as the brain crystals in everybody else's head, except that you do get a choice. You can either create calcium carbonate or you can create calcium phosphorate or calcium calcate. Those other two will kill you, but calcium carbonate gives you life and it causes your intelligence. They literally used to say that your IQ is determined by how many brain crystals are in your pineal gland, absolutely directly proportional. But they also said that you're born with them and you can't add to them. They now know that's nonsense. And they have a thing called biomineralization, where you go through what Steiner calls the etherization of the blood, or the earthly and cosmic nutrition stream, where you change carbon, which is this selfless element, through oxygen, through nitrogen, through hydrogen, and through sulfur or phosphorus. You actually change calcium into calcium carbonate crystals. And once you deposit them in your pineal gland, they are an antenna for higher thinking. Now, if you deposit one of the other two negative types of calcium in your pineal gland, it shortens your life, causes you not to be able to think as clearly from the pineal to the pituitary through the midbrain. And so essentially, crystallization of the most physical substance, which is all done, of course, by gravity, is the key factor. That's why the stone from Lucifer's crown was a stone. That's why the Grail was made from that stone. That's why they will refer to all of these things. But you got a Grail in your head and you have one in your heart. The electric energy coming out of your heart, you'll hear crazy numbers here, but they'll say it's 100 times stronger than the electric charge from your brain. Some will say 10,000 times stronger. That's because the heart, there's no limit to the heart and the energy that can create your torus field around you. Same thing with your pineal gland and your brain. So these are all based upon crystals. The heart is all based upon potassium, sodium reactions going across your atrial sinus node. So again, it's the crystals in your blood, like silica, iron, like potassium, sodium. These are the elements, and people think they're not important, but here's a little fact for you. You can't digest a single vitamin if you don't have an ionized mineral that relates to it in your body. So all those vitamins you're taking will do zero good if you don't have the tiniest speck of ionized minerals that are necessary. For instance, you need zinc, well, I could go into a whole list of them, but you need certain elements, certain minerals. They have to be ionized, because the ionized ones are now more alive than just, the dead mineral substance. These are crystals that have been given life through defying gravity. So as you're transforming carbon from the heart through nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, and sulfur, or phosphorus, you are in fact changing this crystal, and you are heating it up and going through basically cold fusion to change it into another element. Science will tell you that can't happen, but it is the key factor to why we have life. You will, if you're born in certain conditions where you can't think, that we know the names for, that's because you don't have those crystals in your pineal gland. And everyone has a different amount when they're born, and everyone has a different amount after they die, because either you will use them up or you will replace them. And if you replace them, a clairvoyant can look at you and look at what the Tibetans call the pink molecules or atoms or cells in your heart and the brain sand in your pineal gland. So you cannot overestimate the power of this. In the future, Rudolf Steiner said, all we will be eating is minerals. And from that those minerals, we will get all of the nourishment that we need. And as I pointed out, simply breathing air brings in those elements, but then you have to transform them from the earthly nutrition into cosmic nutrition. And this literally makes you a fiery forge for changing elements into their crystalline form. And when you do, you either do one of two things. You either add the good crystals that add levity, or you add the bad crystals that add gravity. And basically, fibromas and death and aging is all about the inability for you to make living crystals in your body, and dead calcium crystals come in and take over, and that brings on your illness and your suffering and your death. So you cannot, again, overemphasize any of these ethers, because they are absolutely profound elements that have yet to be really discovered. Science may tell you the phenomena that they witness as they're trying to destroy things, because that's what they analyze. Ana means to kill. They analyze, they kill things. And as they're dying, they notice the life leaving, but they can't tell you how the life got in there. There's not a single scientist that can actually explain biomineralization, which is depositing these brain crystals, these brain sand in your pineal. They can't describe how that happens. They do not know how that happens. They don't understand how it gets beyond the blood-brain barrier, and they don't understand how it gets in the pineal gland. But those are the master crystals of your, the master Douglas glands, and your size, your timing, your shape, your the way you handle elements, the way you handle salt, the way you handle sugar, the way you handle everything is actually run through the pineal and pituitary as they work together in this electrical piezoelectric exchange, which creates crystals. And then, of course, as soon as that crystal charges and releases into the brain, crystals from your left and right ventricles fall into the third ventricle and supercharge them, so that literally to a psychic, that is what creates your aura, or the halo around the head, is this electrical energy from crystals, using crystal energy, piezoelectric energy, and then stimulating the pituitary, which then causes the pituitary to excrete pituitrin, which is basically the life-giving substance for your nerve and vascular system. So crystals and manifestation in the human body, that's why in Star Wars they came up with the Kyber crystal. They took what I had written in the third treatment as the pineal crystal. The pineal crystal is what protects you, because it's what keeps you awake. It's what is your defense system in every sense of the word. So the idea that the lightsaber is made from a Kyber crystal, well, let's put it this way. Your light body is made by the calcium carbonate crystals in your pineal gland, and it's regulated by that, which of course is regulated from your heart. So you can't overemphasize what it is that the life ether does. And it is, of course, the forces of gravity. It can only happen down here in the place where the warmth, the light, and the sound has set up the ability for life to manifest. And then when you bring that extra warmth, that extra burning of carbon, you actually create this system of crystallizing in your body that is good crystallizing, instead of the death processes, which are the bad crystallizing.
And then in regards to life ether, in a part in your book, you wrote that each organ sends specific forces and frequencies to all the other organs and is balanced by the life ether. We see the harmony of the threefold human being in the nerves, rhythmic system, and the metabolism. Life ether creates the harmony of these three and the mutual interaction of the organs. So on this note of the threefold nature of the human being, there's a lot we could expand on with that threefoldness of things, but I'm going to reference Gurdjieff as he constantly talks about the three-brained beingness of humanity as well, and how we are unaware of a law called equalization of many-sourced vibration, which is basically harmonizing our thinking, feeling, and willing, something that you talk about all the time. And the disproportionate expenditure of the capacities of the three brains arises diseases due to the premature exhaustion of one or two of these brains. Is there anything that you'd like to add in addition to those comments?
He's absolutely right. The neocortex is thinking. It's the human brain. The mammalian brain, the midbrain, is, of course, for mammals. And then the cerebellum is, of course, for all animals. So you have what would be called reptilian, mammalian, and human, neocortex, midbrain, and hindbrain. But what they oftentimes don't mention is that if you don't have the corpus callosum to connect to the left and right side of the brain to begin with, that's the first stage. And that's called the bicameral mind. And so, yes, he's absolutely right. This threefold nature of the human being is explicitly shown in the perfection of the head, with thinking, feeling, and willing being separated into those three areas of the brain. And the thing that connects them now, something science has just realized, is it looks like an Aeolian harp. It's called the striatum. It's in the midbrain, and it harmonizes the neocortex with the cerebellum. And it is absolutely a magical element of the brain that you can't even find a picture of it. Science doesn't want to talk about it because they don't know what it does. They have no clue what it does, but it is the thing that controls memory. It's the thing that controls your body and your thinking. And so the striatum is something that is a key factor to make sure that your triune brain becomes a unified brain.
So amazing. All right. Well, just do some closing kind of comments and stuff. The physical body is composed of both the chemical, tonal, or sound, dense form, and the etheric double. It's like the shell that contains the material and the subtle forces. So each one of the ethers express themselves on the material plane as the four elements perceivable in the world of phenomena. What creates our experiential individual realities when we move through the world and interact with it is various vibratory rates of sense perceptions of phenomena that we are receiving. So our states of consciousness are directly linked to essentially the vibratory rate that we are attuned to. When we are exposed to a particular substance or particular musical tone, these things all interact with our being and have the potential to shift our vibratory rate and attune us to other planes of conscious experience. Quote Manly P. Hall, practically all of the occult wisdom of the world is based upon the knowledge of the four ethers and their powers as factors in the unfoldment of form combinations. The ether is not the world itself, but merely a substance capable of carrying or perpetuating that which the product of some other sphere. Ether was referred to by ancients as the hypothetical mirror of eternity because it mirrors the world of nature into concrete form, vitalizing and impregnating this form with the sparks of life which it contains within itself. So yeah, I like those comments. He talks about in that ether as the singular, but still I just thought those are such great statements. So yeah, I mean, we covered so much, and we could go on for days on this, but I'll give you an opportunity to give any kind of last closing thoughts or statements, or really just anything that you want.
Just that I'm so glad that you study Manly P. Hall, because he is wonderful and his stuff is some of the clearest you'll get. He's got a book on the occult anatomy of the human being, which goes into a lot of these things. It's marvelous because the ancient traditions are very clear about these things. And in all of the deepest spiritual practices that I have researched, which is quite a few, it all comes down to the exact same things we're talking about today. So if you understand the ethers, you're going to have a leg up on the path of initiation.
Absolutely. Oh, and I went ahead and if you look in your chat, I sent you a link to one of those things I was talking about. It's actually a little smaller than I thought. It could fit in one hand. But maybe, is that what maybe you could check that out and see if that's the thing you're talking about. In the article, I think it says it's an ancient weapon of some sort, but yeah, I'll go ahead and.
Oh yeah.
Is that what the thing
Yes,
that you're?
that's yes. Did I lose you?
I'm still here.
Oh no.
I don't know if you could hear me, but
Okay. No, that is a door J. Can you still hear me?
yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. I think I clicked off of something that I wasn't supposed to, but that is a door J. That's called the lightning bolt. And what I was explaining, it's made out of the 7 metals with meteorite. But the one with the open-ended one, that's one that is basically no longer trying to contain the lightning bolt. It's shooting the light bolt out. You take that little round thing in the middle and you put it on your middle finger and your thumb and you roll it back and forth until you feel a charge. And then you can release the charge through that and slay demons with it. That's the reason they call it the diamond lightning bolt.
Alrighty, Douglas, this was one of my favorite episodes. Thank you so much for taking all the time, and I can't wait till next time. I'm sure there will be a next time. So want to go ahead and let people know where they can find you one more time before we close out?
Sure, at ourspirit.com and on Gab, if you want to follow us with geopolitical stuff and all kinds of stuff, if you want to keep up to date with what my wife Tyler and I are doing, you go to Gab and you become a member and you go to Gabriel's_horn, Gabriel's horn with an underscore in between them. And that's where we put out lots and lots of our previous videos and things like that. So, and I want to thank you, Sky, because I think we should have more conversations like this, and I look forward to doing it again.
Absolutely. All right. Well, until next time.